Something has changed within me. Something is not the same. I'm through with playing by the rules of someone else's game. Too late for second guessing. Too late to go back to sleep. It's time to trust my instincts. Close my eyes and leave. It's time to try defying gravity. I think I'll try defying gravity, and you can pull me down.
Welcome to O-Day, Defying Gravity. My name is Bob Greenyer and I'm a volunteer with the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. So, how is everyone this wonderful winter day, 14th of December 2025 here in the Northern Hemisphere? It's great to have you. Join me and little Napoleon here. Why am I calling him Napoleon? Welcome X-Lumpy XXX. Hello, follow the rabbit hole. Simon Finn is in the house. Hello, Joe Kramer, EBB. Hi, Athena Mac. Hi, Yoni6177. Mela Fury. Mr. Gate Mode. Artifact is also here. Hello, Misunderstood. Hello, Overwound Games. It's great to have you all. Hi, Ken Pratt. Hi, Corky Goss. Wow, what a quorum we have. I hope it's not going to buffer for you. It seems to be a little bit slow on my end. We shall see. So obviously that little ditty was from Wicked, the musical and the film of the same name. The first part, or first half, depending on what you are referring to. And actually the song goes on and it says, I'm through accepting limits, because someone says they're so. Some things I cannot change, but till I try, I'll never know. Yeah. It comes at much too high a cost. I'd sooner buy Defying Gravity. Defying Gravity. Defying Gravity. There's a little slip there. So how is everyone? This little piggy that we have here is doing what pigs can't do, which is fly. Pigs can't fly. Or maybe we'll have gravity when pigs can fly. It was a play on an English phrase, and some people caught that out. Pigs might fly. It's to say that basically something is never going to come. And so I thought it appropriate to have him on a Persian rug, a flying carpet no less. Of course, after I put this out, about 3 days later, I realized that the Persian piggy wearing his outfit and flying over the Middle East might offend some people. That was not my intention. I'm only trying to do this work to benefit humanity. I do not want to offend anyone, but I can say that this pig looks extremely, extremely smug. Extremely smug, flying on his flying carpet over this very shiny city beneath. Of course, I chose Napoleon here. For what reason? What do you think? Thank you, Follow the Rabbit Hole. That's very kind of you for that kind donation. Why would I choose a pig and call him Napoleon? Why would I do that? Anyone got any ideas? Thank you also, Bingus Bingus, for your $4.99. Thank you very much. Why would I do that? Anyone got any ideas? He's short? No? No, 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 no. Oh dear. Short and powerful. Well, he is short. Yes, that's right, weed nerd. Overconfident short man. Napoleon. Yeah. Well, maybe this will help you. Because some animals are more equal than others. Yes, very good, Joshua. Yes, Animal Farm. Yes, because some animals are more equal than others. It's a famous, supposedly ironic quote from George Orwell's allegorical novel, Animal Farm, highlighting how ruling elites distort ideals of equality to justify privilege, creating a new hierarchy under the guise of a classless society. A powerful critique of totalitarianism and corruption. Yes, I think we're seeing a bit of that, aren't we? Totalitarianism in places is starting to emerge, even where you would least expect it. And corruption is rife. The phrase evolves from the initial commandments of the farm, ultimately showing how power corrupts, turning revolutionary principles into tools for oppression. Imagine you had developed anti-gravity. Would you share it with everyone, or would you use it as a tool for oppression? I've been arguing for many years that these technologies are known to a number of people and that they are used to subjugate us and oppress us. The meaning in the form of Animal Farm was that the original idea was that the animals overthrew their human farmers with the aim of creating a truly equal society, summarized by the 7 commandments, including all animals are equal. However, the pigs became corrupt, no less. The ruling pig, called Napoleon, gradually amended. In fact, the pigs, that is the ruling pigs, led by Napoleon, they gradually amended the commandments to suit their selfish interests. Yes, they did. The original commandment, which is all animals are equal, was twisted into all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And that was used to justify the pig's special treatment and privileges over other farm animals, which effectively created a new, more oppressive class system. It's a pointed documentary on how political ideologies like communism, which Orwell was critiquing, can be twisted by those in power to maintain control, betraying original egalitarian goals. Now, imagine a situation where all of human knowledge is captured by a few, therefore rendering you useless and redundant, but you're still eating. And how would you keep control in a situation where the very equal people running the show might be threatened by a vast number of people who they've taken their knowledge and their forebearers' knowledge and they're using it to milk them, but they don't really need them, do they? What would you do? Would you set up a control grid? Would you get rid of habeas corpus? Would you get rid of the right to jury trial? I don't know. Would you say that they don't deserve the land that they've been farming for many generations? It needs to be removed from them by hook or crook? I don't know. I have a sad thing to report that Infinite Energy website is down and the magazine is not funded to continue at the moment. This is a great shame. Ever since it was set up by Jean Malov, and Isaac Asimov and others. But I'm going to refer to an article. You can still find it on the Wayback Machine. And it is here. This is Martin Fleischmann on page 2 of his interview with Christopher P. Tinsley in 1996, 95, something like that. And it says here, are you interested? This is, T is Christopher P. Tinsley. He says, are you interested in any other, shall we say, controversial areas of science at all? Are there any things which most people would perhaps dismiss, but perhaps you have a less certain view? And Martin Fleischmann responds, yes, well, cold fusion is part of a much wider area. And I have been really quite uncertain that our theory and understanding of condensed matter is at all satisfactory. However, I'm not interested in some of the more extreme ideas which have been put forward and which interest you, in the future of energy. Christopher says, I will say that some of this gravity modification stuff does, in fact, appear to have a theoretical basis as well as some experimental evidence. Well, Fleischmann responds, well, if you think about gravitation, until we have a unified field theory, then you can't be sure what is going to happen. Christopher P. Tinsley says, even Frank Close said that we don't know much about gravity and anything might happen. Fleischmann responds, we really have an incomplete understanding, one would assume, of either condensed matter or gravity in this instance, given the subject of the conversation at this point. This will change, but there are one or two notable exceptions, which I don't want to talk about now. We have no understanding of quantum gravity, and until that happens, we can't be sure that nature won't play some rather strange tricks. As I told you, when we were talking before, we had about 4 projects which we were working towards. One was to do with gravitation. One was actually to do with the behavior of electrons in metals. We actually started to collect equipment together to investigate the behavior of electrons in metal, but ... And in this whole interview, I've said it before, I'll say it again. Every time you have a paragraph, you have either T or F, T or F, T or F, but only when they are discussing this notion about gravity and the fact that Martin Fleischmann was working on it as part of 4 things alongside cold fusion being one of them at that time. This is the only time where you get that but ... and then a new F, as if something had been cut out of the conversation here. I'd love to know what that was. But it continues with Martin. He says, I have told you there have been certain themes which have run through my work, although they have never really been disclosed. I have often worked on topics where something short of the final answer would nevertheless be quite interesting. When I think about what I have done, I find that I have failed to achieve any of my longer term objectives. Christopher says, a pretty impressive failure, surely? Martin answers, I have been content with what I have achieved, but I have not achieved what I wanted to achieve. Christopher asks which was, and Martin replies, to gain a better understanding of condensed matter. In order to do so, as with the cold fusion story, I find the answers to the global questions have eluded me. Okay, so that is Martin's commentary there. So I'm right off the bat, I'm saying that Martin Fleischmann in mid-1990s admitted publicly that cold fusion was one part of 4 things that he was investigating at the time. One of those things was to do with gravitation. Okay, now on that note, I can say, news this week, that I have done a tentative replication of Chizoff. That is accelerating a rotating body, in this case an angle grinder. And we had, or rather I had, a plus-minus deflection of the laser beam, but my distance that I could achieve where I was doing the experiment was only 34 meters. And when I was observing it, really, it wasn't so perceptible when I had it one way. It's only when I kind of like took the angle grinder and turned it over the other way, I could see it moving up. When I turned it over the other way, it could move down. Of course, light does not weigh very much. It does not weigh very much. But the idea is that it's manipulating the medium and resulting in that bending of the laser beam. So what I'd like to do is to see if different materials on the angle grinder make a difference, and if I can get it recorded for you. Yeah, there is a thinking about whether it changes the magnetic field of the motor. But I think when you look at the other materials I'm about to show you, you may reconsider that. I recommend that people go and look at the Evo Labs DAO call this week. It was absolutely awesome. And I want to thank Artifact, who's on the call here, for the excellent work he's done on the data acquisition tool. Absolutely legendary stuff. But all kinds of good things are happening over the world to take this technology forward. And I want to thank everyone that is doing their various efforts to achieve those goals. Also this week, we had multiple exotic vacuum object-based technologies gaining verification. There was George Eagley. I mentioned his technology in short-run tests against calibration was getting over COP of 4. That is direct electrical generation. We had, and there was an interview actually with Tim Ventura, which I recommend people go and watch. Also yesterday with Dr. George Eagley, so that's quite timely. And then ENG8, they had Jean-Paul Biberian verified that their plasmoid reactor, which is exotic vacuum objects, it is producing a period of time of self-sustain. I don't exactly know what that means. I didn't see so much detail on that. I hope to see more detail on that. I may be seeing another technology on Tuesday of this week, possibly. The claims are extremely bold. For that, again, it looks like it's based on coherent energy transformation-based technology, exotic vacuum objects, ball lightning. So I will let you know as soon as I can, assuming that meeting goes ahead. And just to reiterate, I am working on the Matsumoto PDF version of the remastered book. I'm trying to get that out to everyone before Christmas, but it is a challenge because every time I think I found the best picture for a particular paper, then I find a better one. And I'm proud of doing that, but it's kind of like one step forward, two step back. But anyway. It's going to be very nice. I mean, in the original book, you like see these images which you basically can't see anything on the frame, and there's a description underneath, and it's going like, okay, I'm going to take your word for it. And now we've got like a color photograph of the thing, and it's like, okay, now I know what it's talking about. So it's really cool. And there's many things that I've realized that he did that explain later work by other people, and so it's going to be nice to walk through those realizations, and I hope people really take the work more seriously when the book is available. Okay, so we did a series of presentations kind of on this subject. Did okay, I got issues. Okay. I don't know if this is working. Sorry. Can someone let me know? Am I back? Oh, okay, sorry. This is very frustrating. Okay, all right. Yeah, so I don't know how much you caught there, but yeah, Amy obviously took her own life, is the story, and so that was a bit shocking. So I'm going to talk a little bit to the paper that she referred me to. Now, what she said at the time was that they were threatening her and her father, that if they didn't release what they had done, then they were going to release it and something like exclude their names or whatever. And so they were forced into a situation. And Amy sent me the link to the area where you could get it from NASA's website, but it was kind of like a bit buried, so that it wasn't very obvious. That's what she said. And she said that their work had continued and they had got further with their findings, and that it was only a subset of their work that was in the paper that was published on NASA's website. And you can see that kind of commentary reflected in a paragraph in this paper. Now, I have looked at this paper before, just briefly, for another aspect in a previous presentation on these subjects. But I think I wanted to return to this, and the reason was Ashton Forbes had actually shown this image. And he'd shown this image in a paper by a guy called Gary V. Stevenson. And this interested me because Gary V. Stevenson has been in an email chain that I have been a part of, but don't recall speaking to him personally. So this was the paper, and it's saying here, gravitational field propulsion techniques. And he's talking about the forward coil here. And I talked about Forward's work because it was in some other documents. This one, for instance, here, by the very well-known now Eric W. Davis, and it's called Advanced Propulsion Study. And there was this image, which is called the forward coil here, forward coil. And I didn't go into it in too much detail. It was in yet another paper, but it was also in this paper, which was one that I had referred to again many moons ago, called the Anti-Gravity for Aerospace Applications. And it referred to this diagram, which was an electric coil producing an electric dipole, and then it's comparing that and the field equations to the gravity equations by having this analog here. And it's talking about them being similar, and it's referring to forward here. Okay, so I'd referred to this many moons ago, and the reason that this took my interest particularly was this down here, where they're talking about a dipole gravitational field generator being an inside-out whirling dense matter torus, reference 5, and it had the lens-Thirring effect and forwards linearization analysis generalizes all of these effects into the following two key ingredients that are required to produce anti-gravity forces. 1. Any mass with a velocity and an acceleration exerts many different general relativistic forces on a test mass. And 2. These forces act in the direction of the velocity and the direction of the acceleration of the originating mass. In summary, these forces are equivalent to the gravitational forces, which can be used to cancel the Earth's gravitational field. One can also view this genre of devices as a gravity catapult machine, in which the machine pushes a body away using its general relativistic anti-gravity forces to impart a change in velocity. A space launch operator on the ground wanting to send a payload up into orbit would just ratchet up the strength of the upward directed anti-gravity field to some value above that necessary to escape gravity, and after pressing the release button, the payload accelerates up and away into orbit. These devices could also be placed in Earth orbit, stationed anywhere within the solar system, or even distributed throughout the galaxy in order to establish a network of gravity catapults. Space travelers could begin their trip by being launched from a catapult on Earth's surface, and when they reached space, they would jump through various catapults as needed to reach their destination. Sounds like something like Mass Effect. But anyway, so here we go. And the thing is, there's a problem, and this is what is going to be the main point of the discussion today, is that you can't, with a normal vortex soliton, which this kind of thing looks quite a lot like, they're not stable. That is, this concept which I introduced to you in the last presentation or the presentation before, but I think the last presentation, this thing of virial state. That's V-I-R-I-A-L. This is where a structure has enough attractive forces to maintain itself together, but not too much so that it claps in on itself, and enough repulsive forces so that it doesn't collapse in on itself, but not too much repulsive forces or outward directing forces such that it explodes. This is a stable state, and everything that is stable in the universe has this virial state. That is to say, electron, proton, up to solar systems and even up to galaxies. You know, they all have this balance between wanting to fly apart and wanting to come together, but not crushing into nothing. Okay? Yeah, it's about balance. Okay? And so the thing about a ring soliton, it doesn't matter whether a dolphin is blowing it in air bubbles or someone is blowing a smoke bubble. This is what was realized in the early days of studying vortex solitons in the 1800s, that they don't maintain their stability. They seem to be stable moving forward, but they kind of spread out and then they dissipate. Okay, this is even true of the 1970s work with laser into nonlinear plasma that was more recently replicated in 2021, where they produced these fields of up to 1.36 thousand Teslas and charge separation of 3.6 trillion volts per meter. That's some sort of dielectric going on. That's pretty intense, that kind of field charge separation going on in this structure. But those things still come apart and dissipate. What we know doesn't come apart are fractal structures, and we're going to discuss in more detail why I believe that is. But first, I want to relate it, the lead-in concepts, to gravity research at its highest edge, and try and show a logical series of arguments that get you to a point of knowing that you know that it needs to be minimally a wheel within a wheel within a wheel. Okay. Now we saw the structure break up in Canada. Now I know some people have an opinion about that. I don't care whether it was created by a spark, a power line, a ball lightning or whatever. The fact is, geometrically, it's exactly what it should be. You'll see that other aspects of it are what it should be from other studies of ball lightning. And most synthetic ball lightning is produced by arcing and sparking. And so people that have that kind of issue with is it or isn't it, I don't care. It's irrelevant to the subject matter of is it one of these structures? Yes, it is. And the overall sphere cannot maintain its stable state because the internal spheres start losing their virial stability, and when they completely lose their virial stability, then the overall structure fails. Okay, so one builds the other structure at the next quanta up, and I've discussed this many times. So back to this 2024 paper by Gary V. Stevenson. When I came to this and he's talking about this, he's saying the GRFC case is conceptually composed of just a mass flow toroid. And we're going to learn exactly what that is what is exactly meant by that. First conceived of in 1962 by Robert Forward and extended to electron mass flow without flow withing superconducting magnetic energy storage devices in 2019 Stevenson. So basically what Stevenson is saying is that there's a mass flow in here that leads to something that's structurally the same as an electric dipole, but you get a gravitational dipole. And in Stevenson's work, he's actually using superconducting coils, and it's the actual mass flow of the electrons rather than a fluid as conceived by Forward in 1962 that does the anti-gravity field. Okay, of course, electrons, the amount of electrons, the actual mass of that flow is probably not very heavy in the case of going along wires. It is designed to concentrate gravitomagnetic acceleration field in the center of the coil while spreading it out along the outer rim. If a flying craft were to encompass only the coil inward, it would experience only upward spiraling acceleration, excluding the downward as external to the craft. 2021, Stevenson 3 enhanced the coupling effect by placing a high index material in the throat of the toroid. So basically you need a high gravitational index material in here, and you're going to see that that is probably a dielectric, and that comes from work that I shared in 2018. And you're going to see that in a minute. And he talks about how a tokamak itself will produce gravitational waves and so on. Anyway, I went and looked for the paper to which he refers, and this is reference 1 down here, and I'll go down to reference 1, and it says here, Forward R, 1962, Guidelines to Anti-Gravity, American Journal of Physics. Okay. Now, why was that so interesting to me? Because I had seen, as I showed you before, this version, okay, which looks like a coil winding around a toroid, showing the gravitational vector, and it's the mass flow going in here. When I'm looking at this, I got excited because I don't see this as a coil. I see this as a series of loops, okay? And so I went to see his original paper as the reference was given here. And I'm looking through this thing here, and I'm looking through this thing. And do you know what? I see this, which is in one of the papers we referred to earlier over this one here. It's got the wire coil here, and the mass flow coil here. But it doesn't have, and these are better versions in the original paper, much nicer pictures. So this is the electric field here. And so he's doing the gravitational dipole here. And I don't see the diagram that he's referring to here. I don't see it. So I actually reached out to him and I said, "Dear Gary, I hope you're all well. In your recent paper, Gravitational Field Propulsion Techniques, you have the following diagram as from R. Forward's 1962 paper, Guidelines to Anti-Gravity." So I just contrast adjusted it here so that we could see it. It is marked as figure 4B, but you say in the legend it is figure 1A from 1962 Forward 1. I have attached this cited paper, that's the one that he gave a reference to, and the sketch does not appear either as figure 1A or 4B. So the diagram shows it as 4B, and he refers to it in the legend as figure 1A from this one, and it's neither 1A nor 4B. I said, could this actually be from his 1962 essay to the Gravity Research Foundation, for which he won a second prize? If so, did you get it from Robert L. Forward papers at the UC Riverside Special Collections or from some other source? If you have the original source paper or essay, I would appreciate it. Kind regards. And so he actually wrote back, and this is fantastic, actually quickly wrote back, and he was very gracious. He said, "Bob, thank you for your questions. Questions such as yours greatly improve the revision cycle of my papers, and I am always most grateful for inputs and corrections such as you have suggested. I did a little research into my reference records and found that indeed you are correct. This figure 4B is from Robert's original essay for the Gravity Research Foundation prize. I have a photostat of his prize-winning essay, obtained from the Gravitational Research Foundation itself, and I have attached a scanned copy to this email. I must confess I do not actually recall how I came to possess this document. I have found an online link for it, by the way. He says, perhaps I received it from Bob himself, because he was contemporary. We were contemporaries at Hughes Aircraft Company. He was at their Malibu Hughes Research Labs, HRL, while I was at their El Segundo Electro-Optical and Data Systems Group, EDSG. Unfortunately, we lost Bob back in 2002, so I am no longer able to reach out to him, nor our mutual friend Bob Baker, whose funeral I spoke at. It seems I may be the last man of my generation standing with an interest in this area. Another reason to thank you for your interest. Let's keep the flame alive. Yes, so he's excited that we are working to understand this thing called gravity. And so that was very productive. So the paper that he sent me here was typed. And it's almost, well, it is very difficult to read. And it has these equations here. The key equation here being that in the z-axis, the coefficient is larger in magnitude for the pull into the plane of rotation. And that gives you something. Okay, so it's hand typed and scanned, and then equations handwritten in there. And then these are the diagrams in question. Okay. Now, this definitely is a coil producing an electric field, and when I'm thinking about this, I now realize that this isn't a series of individual superconducting wires. This really is, sadly to say, a not very well drawn coil of a coiled solenoid. It's just what he drew, and so it follows that this also is not a solenoid, or rather toroid, with toroidal mass flows going around it, which got me so excited. Okay, it's not that. So, in fact, if I can find it here, you can see from his actual paper here that the two diagrams as shown here are in fact much better drawn, and they are drawn as a proper solenoid going around in a torus, and the one down here is again a generator of a dipole gravitational field, and this is mass flow going through these things, and it is a proper spiral going around here. Okay, so I got excited because I thought it was one thing, but it's not. Okay, now when we'll have a look at this paper, but what I've done is I've actually taken the original, and if I can find it, I made it readable. So let me just get that up for you. Ba-da-ba-bum. Give me a second. Okay, nearly there. Okay. And when I was reconstructing this document for your viewing pleasure, I actually noticed a couple of errors. And it's interesting because people made errors back then. If you look at the lens Thirring paper, which we also have up here, they needed to correct it a number of years later. And that was okay, you know, people aren't perfect. I know I am not perfect. I regularly make mistakes. But anyway, this is very readable. And this is the original one. But what I found was the equations in the original one and the equations in this original letter here, or essay, these equations here, it's 1 over BR squared here, but in the one in the paper, it's not that. If I can find it, it's 1 over B minus R down here, you can see. Okay, B minus R. So I don't know entirely which one it's meant to be, and maybe that can be worked out in due course. Let me just see where I put that now. Windows. Here. So I've actually got both equations in here at the moment. So it's either this one from the original paper or this one from the printed version. I'm more... I kind of tend towards this one. I just think he missed out a minus here and a minus here in these equations. So I think that's probably what it should be. But I do want to get that correct. Other than that, we can read through this and understand this. But I wanted to draw your attention right to the end here. Firstly, is research areas. No, in fact, further down, actually. Gravitational properties of matter. When we look at the gravitational analogues to electromagnetism, we notice that there is one analogous quantity which has not been investigated. This is the gravitational equivalent to the magnetic permeability. Our electrical power distribution systems depend upon anomalously large and nonlinear permeability of iron and other magnetic materials. All atoms have spin. All materials will have a gravitational permeability different than that of free space. Rough calculations show that this difference is very small, but experimental investigations may find anomalously large or nonlinear effects that can be used to enhance time-varying gravitational fields. Since the magnetic moment and the inertial moment are combined in an atom, it may be possible to use this property to convert time-varying electromagnetic fields into time-varying gravitational fields. The only way at present to look for such materials is to intersperse wedges of material between gravitational wave generators and detectors such as those described by J. Weber and look for the change in amplitude or direction of propagation. None of this work will be... Okay, so that effectively is what Gary Stevenson is doing. He's putting materials in this area of gravitational waves in partly to rectify oscillating ones, but in other cases to enhance the effect. Okay, and you're going to see that the work of Amy Eskridge and Richard Eskridge were looking at materials that did that, and you're also going to see that the work in Russia that has been done in the mid-2010s by Zatelepin and Baranov, and more recently by Shipov, are in that direction also. But it's this last point I want to show you in Robert Forward's paper, which reminds me of our friend Piggy Napoleon the Pig. It's this: none of this work will be easy. We are not going to have anti-gravity in every home. But we don't have a Saturn rocket in every garage either. Future progress in control of gravitation, like all modern sciences, will require special projects involving large sums of men, money, and energy. We are not going to have anti-gravity in every home. That's even if they have it. We're not going to have it in every home. We're not going to have it in every home. It's kind of like, my precious, my precious. Okay. All right. So we can go through this. This essay emphasizes some little-known aspects of Einstein's general theory of relativity. These features, although of minor theoretical importance, can lead us to a generation and control of gravitational forces. Four distinctly different non-Newtonian gravitational forces are described. These research areas will lead to control of gravitation. These research areas which will lead to control of gravitation are pointed out as guidelines for initial investigation into these areas. And they are given. In Einstein's general theory of relativity, there are a number of different ways to generate non-Newtonian gravitational forces. All of these methods could theoretically be used to counteract the gravitational field of the Earth and thus are a form of anti-gravity. The three methods of obtaining non-Newtonian gravitational fields, which are outlined below, are probably known by Einstein before he published his paper on the principles of general relativity in 1916. They were first specifically derived by Thirring in 1918, and they have been contained in every text on general relativity since then. These forces are well known to the theorists in general relativity, but are little known to those outside of the field. The forces arise from the application of the principle of general relativity to systems of moving masses. The moving masses give rise to forces on a test body, which are similar to the usual centrifugal and Coriolis forces, although much smaller. The accelerations given to the test body by these forces are independent of the mass of the test body and are therefore true gravitational forces. Effect of rotating masses on stationary bodies. When a rotating system of masses is investigated using Einstein's general theory of relativity, it can be shown that besides the usual Newtonian term, the gravitational scalar potential contains terms which arise from the rotation of the body. One of the shapes which has been investigating is the rotating massive ring. For a massive ring rotating in the xy plane, the acceleration on the stationary test body near the origin is approximately these, where m and r are the mass and radius of the ring, omega is the angular velocity, and the gravitational constant is that, the Newtonian gravitational constant, c is the speed of light, and x, y, z are the coordinates of the test body with respect to the origin of the rotating mass. From these equations, we can see that not only does a rotating mass force the test body away from the axis in an imitation of centrifugal force, but it also pulls it into the plane of rotation. Okay, so we actually need to go to this paper here of his thing, and he's got this diagram here to show the rotation here. And we'll continue in this one, although this isn't based on the original letter. But also pulls upwards into the plane of rotation as shown. So basically the test body here is pulled up. Now this is what I was arguing was actually going on with the Nazi bell. That is to say, I think on the gantry they had some rotating mass. I think it might well have been a pool of rotating mercury on the outside, and they span that round at extreme force and the bell lifted up. But when I actually run the maths for the equations he's got here, and I rotate something very, very quickly, the effect is incredibly small based on the equations. It's really, really small. Okay. So I don't think that's going to cut it. But anyway, it has been pointed out that a rotating mass will exert a force similar to a centrifugal force in a stationary test body. Also, if the test body is moving at the some constant velocity v, it will experience an additional force which is proportional to the cross product of the angular velocity of the rotating mass and the linear velocity of the test body. The additional force can be compared to two others. Mechanically, it acts like a very weak Coriolis force. Electrically, it acts like the gravitational equivalent of the Lorentz force on a charged particle moving through a magnetic field. One of the shapes which has been investigating is a rotating massive spherical shell. The acceleration on a test body moving with a velocity v inside the shell is approximately this, where vx and vy are the x and y components of the velocity of the test body, and so on. Okay, so he shows this rotating test body. This is like Lenz and Thüring's work. I have some imagery, some translations of the Germans of Lenz and Thüring work. They're actually looking at this from a kind of almost like a planetary body rather than anything else. However, this is where I'm going to introduce the first of the video clips this evening, and I want you to listen very much to what Zatelepin says here about ball lightning and its rotation and its relevance to its so-called anti-gravity effect. So without further ado, I will do this.
Dmitry Sergeyevich discovered that apparently ball lightning does rotate. This is a photograph of a typical ball lightning. It's clearly shown right here. You can clearly observe that this section is blue while this other part is red. This photo of erosion particles. And this here, this erosive particle like or experiments like Klimov's experiments. Here's the decay image. This is the decay, you see, of that very thing. They hit the target with a laser. This kind of stuff flies out. This is how it's colored. And these very things, yes, I'll conclude. And so Doppler estimates indicate that the surface rotates at least at colossal speeds of about 100,000 kilometers per second. Next slide, please. Here are some more photographs for you. And here you can clearly observe that this particular section is colored red and this other section is colored blue, red and blue. You'll notice that in ball lightning, if you take a careful look, there is a certain axial structure, and this again suggests that it is rotating. And furthermore, if you examine it even more closely, you will see that an axial structure is present here as well, only it is tilted. So these ball lightning phenomena rotate, but their rotation isn't always strictly vertical. They also move in various other ways. I won't delve into speculation right now, but I do have certain thoughts. If we cast our minds back then, Dmitry Sergeyevich also discovered that the rotation of ball lightning changes over time. Rotational frequency. Because, you see, these previous photographs that I showed, they exist in time, and it's noticeable that this imbalance, the red and the blue, it changes over time. This means that the speed is changing. And we're going to return to a point that we discussed and wrote about just a few slides earlier. This means that the levitation of ball lightning is possibly connected to the fact that its rotation speed changes. Next slide, please. Right, so if any of those present have ever worked in the field of hydrodynamics, they will undoubtedly be aware that in hydrodynamics, even when we take into consideration the Navier-Stokes equations, the turbulent movements themselves are simply not being generated. If the flow was planar, for instance, it will stay planar, and not all hydrodynamicists know this. This is a key point in misunderstanding turbulence. If it exists, then much can be written about its conservation, the reproduction of vortices, frequency transformation, and so on. But where does it originally come from? That's the question. And if we add our approach, then if you have a planar flow, but notice that here the fluid moves at a low speed and here at a high speed, in the boundary layer, there is a transverse motion. So essentially the fluid moves like this. So it's constantly accelerating, and from flat motion, movement emerges in this direction. So it becomes three-dimensional.
And this is exactly turbulence. Next slide.
So, here's something else to entertain you. Now, if you look, there are millions of these photos. This is what the stem of an atomic explosion looks like. Oh, well, it's obvious that everything is twisted, right? It's just so visible to the naked eye. Next slide.
Well, I've pretty much said it all. Seemingly,
this is where the violation happens. If the medium, if the body, well, I'll read them anyway. It's important that if the body upon which you exert a force possesses finite dimensions and is not a mere point, then Newton's mechanics simply does not apply. And you must also add a moment, and this, and additional forces related to the moment, and additional forces related to the impulse. And that's what we did. This medium apparently has an electromagnetic nature because these forces combine differently in the electrics and metals. Gravitational influence apparently has the same nature because gravity distinguishes both the electrics and metals. And ball lightning is the final conclusion. It seems to levitate because it, yes, I can tell you there's another reason why we can discuss this here. Everyone present knows that these particles from some kind of strange radiation, they leave these distinct tracks. These are sometimes referred to as tractor tracks, right? If we adopt our approach, then if you start to break, it all begins to spin. That is, the spinning arises as a result of breaking. A tractor track is the result of these particles breaking. Thank you.
Okay, so essentially, if you go and look at the full presentation, I gave the links and also my translation. So it was recorded, I think, on the 3rd of October 2018 by myself, and then I did a translation. I worked with Valery Zatalepin, and I published that, I think, in March 2019. This was about rotating different bodies at the end of a balance. And so you had the balance like in a line there, and you had the body spinning around like this. And if it was a metal, there appeared to be no significant changes in the torsion, the tension on the stress gauge at one end. What they found was when they put a dielectric in there, and in one case it was like water, and they span it, there appeared to be a pressure down one way, and if they span it the other way, the pressure was inverse. So one was gravity, one was anti-gravity. So it was a directional force based on spinning a dielectric at a high rate of speed, but it wasn't at constant speed. It was when they stopped it that it occurred. And so basically it's when it's accelerating or decelerating, there are these changes. Okay, and he then goes on to note that based on Doppler calculations, that the speed of natural ball lightning has been recorded at 100,000 kilometers per second, and that gives you this red-blue shift on the sides of the ball lightning, which changes. Now, of course, ball lightning is known to go up and down quite a bit, but it also you even saw it on the one in Canada, where it changes its kind of intensity on its glow, and you can also see some color changes going on in there on a macro state, kind of visual aspect. subtle, but you can see it's relatively subtle even on the very good images of ball lightning that they had, and also on probably free electron laser induced erosion particles. You get these same red and blue shifts going on, which implies that they are actually creating ball lightning type structures, although not necessarily as stable as naturally formed ones. And what this is saying, if it's going at 100,000 kilometers per second, then it actually is 1/3 the speed of light. So the other thing is also that he focuses on the fact that because it behaves differently depending on whether you use a metal or a dielectric, then the medium itself, he argues, has some electric and magnetic properties in there. And of course, notice that the dielectric was the thing that worked. And of course, if we go back to what Stevenson is doing, he's actually inserting a dielectric into his apparatus in order to improve his experimental observations. Anyway, in terms of some of the other comments that he made there, he said that a ball lightning is changing its speed, which means it's both accelerating and deaccelerating. And you can imagine that I call this kind of like it being a virial system, but it has a certain amount of fuel. And when it gets up to a certain threshold, it has a full non-radiating boundary, in which case it's not needing to consume any more fuel from the environment. And it can maintain that until it burns out the fuel that's in its core. And then it then opens up its mouth to eat some more fuel. In this case, I would argue that it's moisture in the air, and predominantly the fuel would be water. Water provides a source of oxygen and hydrogen, and of course you've got oxygen in the air and nitrogen, so likely those are the most likely fuels that it's consuming. And so I would suggest that when it's in its full virial state, it's consumed enough material such that it's able to maintain the magnetohydrodynamic, fractal magnetohydrodynamic structure, and then it's kind of like fully spun up. But as it spins down, it kind of opens up its mouth and grabs in a little bit more fuel. And I see that this happens all the way down to atoms and subatomic particles, all the way up to black holes and galaxies. They have a cycle of consumption and expulsion and basically living. They're kind of like living creatures, okay? And I will refer you back actually to the Gabriel Cron work that we were talking about his 1934 paper that won the Montefiore Award from Liège University, his prize in Belgium. And it talks about the fact that it's during acceleration in a purely electromagnetic system, and that is where you get this kind of unification of the forces, or in other words, the appearance of the gravitational mass of the rotor during acceleration in a purely electromagnetic system changes all ordinary derivatives and absolute derivatives. And then he goes on down here that the phenomena takes place inside all machines during acceleration and hunting. So hunting is where you are both either accelerating or decelerating. You're trying to find a particular speed, okay? And that is kind of what the ball lightning is doing. It's kind of hunting. And I think hunting is quite a nice phrase, because it's like if you are running out of fuel locally, then you need to move and hunt to get the food in order to operate. Okay, so the real key point that he was making is, in my view, that there is a medium which the anti-gravity effect relies on, which must be electromagnetic in nature. And as I see Gordon pointing out here, it's not just mathematical points in space. It's actually something. And I believe that Bob McElrath from CERN Theory Group when he wrote his paper in 2008-9 that the relic neutrinos are a standard model compliant particle that enables gravity, and that it is these particles that are being interacted with, but it's not necessarily interacted with directly through electromagnetism. It's interacted with the building of toroidal moments. And you can start to think that if you've got spin inside a atom, and then you spin that thing that's spinning, and you're accelerating it, you're going to introduce some phase shifting, which is in the kind of spirit of a toroidal moment. So that is kind of what I believe is kind of going on there. And you can see here also in Gabriel's chron here, in every rotating machine, the following n-dimensional space waves or vectors can be assumed to exist at any one instant during an acceleration. A current density and velocity vector, a vector which includes the flux linkage vector, magnetic vector potential, and angular momentum, the rotor flux density. Okay, all right. This is very, very interesting to me. Now, again, you can't accelerate a solid thing extremely fast, because after a while, the energy that is trying to throw that out becomes so monstrous that things will fly apart. And you can see this in the work of Eugene Podkletnov. You know, he said you can only accelerate the superconducting material up to a certain speed, otherwise it'll just fly apart. And I guess that was, in my view, the challenge with the Nazi bell. Of course, Eugene Podkletnov has recently been stating that they've got levitation from superconducting toroidal asymmetric wire structures, where it's producing an asymmetric rotating magnetic field. And so I think the next video that I'm going to show you is from Shipov. It was actually presented on Wednesday, and so I've only got a couple of sections from this video for you, but I think they're very critical. Now remember what I said earlier. The vortex soliton is a structure that is, while stable and is fantastically stable for several uses, it does dissipate. It doesn't maintain its integrity. Its virial state, that is the state at which it's, you know, not trying to fly apart and not collapsing into itself. In fact, a typical vortex soliton never collapses into itself. That just basically doesn't happen. We have seen in the toroidal cavitation bubbles in ultra experiments that when they come out from the toroidal dip, the kind of Mexican hat inverted that they're in, and they come out, they will go into a sphere, but then it's a gas bubble of that type. You can imagine it going in there just because based on surface tension, okay? But typically they kind of dissipate, and this is true of smoke rings as well. They kind of come out and they travel for a little while. They kind of keep their shape, but then ultimately they start falling apart. We looked at that with electromagnetic sense and how you can achieve stability with electromagnetic toroids in recent presentations. Okay, so I'm going to share the next one because I think that the virial state, that is, and then I'll show with some actual practical experiments how we know this is the case. How we know this is the case. We'll also look, before we go there, to Amy Eskridge and Richard Eskridge's work and what they found. And I think it's going to be very, very interesting when you start to put all these pieces together. Okay, so the second video of the night is from Shipov, and this is building on the kind of work that you just saw with the rotating, well, you didn't see it, but it's in the other work that he's referring to, Zatelepin with a spinning disc like that. You can go and see it in the blog. I put the two videos in there, or you can go and look at the links at the top of that video that I just shared. This is talking about an armature rotating around a common axis with a balanced mass where a gyro is on one end, and then they add or either one way or the other angular momentum to the gyroscope at the end, and you see the effect. And so this is not just a spinning in the same plane, but taking it to a 90 degrees on the end of the plane. So, okay. All right, here we go.
So this phenomenon is observed in the experiment. I'll get straight to the point. I don't want to write out any complex formulas just yet, but I'm going to show you an actual experiment right now. So please observe, what exactly does this experiment consist of? Right here, positioned in the center, is a balance beam. Here it is, the balance beam. From one end, this beam can rotate. It will always be rotating. If you look from above counterclockwise, here, the load is 10 kilograms. And here, well, the gyroscope also 10 kilograms. When nothing is rotating, the load completely balances the gyroscope. Now, if we start, let's spin the gyroscope. Let's get it spinning. And then we begin to rotate the base itself. So we have rotation around axis O1 and around axis O2, that's a double rotation. Then we'll see that when we rotate the gyroscope in one direction, say to the right here at omega r, there's an increase in the gyroscope's weight as indicated by the scales. And if in reverse, then the gyroscope's weight decreases. That is, it's an absolutely simple school experiment. But look, he's saying that the force of inertia in this case, look, he's letting go now, the gyroscope isn't spinning, and the weight balances the disc. The disc is metallic, approximately 10 kilograms. There is no change, so to speak, in the weight of either one. But now he's rotating it. Look, he's rotating it now. Well, if you look from the end of the vector, then it's a right-hand rotation. You see the gyroscope now. The gyroscope now weighs less, more.
More, please, more.
It has weight because it outweighs the load. So next he will stop it now and then twist it in the opposite direction. If we apply these equations that are shown below, he winds it in the opposite direction, and then he sets it spinning once more counterclockwise. The weight of the gear, these indicator arms clearly demonstrate a significant reduction in the gyroscope's overall weight. So if we apply these equations that are at the bottom, the normal force has been added here. That's the capital R, right? An external gravitational force acts on all of this, and it balances the weight and the gyroscope itself. And here we will consider that A naught is equal to 0 because the center of rotation does not move anywhere. Right now it is simply stopped, and it shows that everything is balanced. So A capital is equal to 0 because there is no movement and centrifugal force acts on the particles of the rotating gyroscope. We assume that this Coriolis force is quite small because particles do not move on the gyroscope itself. And if we consider that the equation, this very force, the derivative of omega with respect to time is also missing because the rotation occurs at an approximately constant angular velocity. This applies to all points of the gyroscope. Then we observe that a centrifugal force is introduced. I will not elaborate on its specific direction, which effectively modifies the support reaction. So if we set in motion a precessing gyroscope of this particular kind, we then observe a phenomenon as if the support reaction is somehow changing. And this phenomenon, it is actually noted in a very excellent book by Olkowski Igor Ivanovich titled Course of Theoretical Mechanics for Physicists. There is such a publication, it's at our university, at Moscow State University, and it's noted on page 359 that during the precession of gyroscopes, and here precession occurs, rotation along two axes, when precession is observed, the support reaction changes. It's directly derived and written there. So it turns out that there are phenomena where we have complex rotation not just around one axis, but around several. We have 3 axes, which means we can experience precession, nutation, and proper rotation. We are conducting certain experiments that at first glance appear to be very surprising. But from another perspective, we, for example, wrote down the energy of a rotating body. This is E, the total energy. It equals kinetic energy, mv squared plus j omega squared over 2. This is a well-known school formula. But if we write this formula on the right side in the form of, Einstein's formula, that is mass times c squared, right? Then we will observe that the mass will not solely depend on its velocity. Even if the translational velocity, let's say v is precisely 0, then our mass, according to this specific formula, begins to be influenced by the angular velocity. So essentially, this very simple formula here is telling us that for the rotational motion of matter, it is absolutely essential for us to consider the crucial fact that the rest mass, that is the mass when v is precisely equal to 0, begins to become directly dependent on the angular velocity of its rotation. So what we have just done is derive the formula which effectively generalizes the equations. Specifically, you see Einstein's formula by stating that when matter undergoes rotation, the mass then becomes dependent on its angular velocity. This is, I'm explaining this in very simple terms right now, but as it turns out, it also works out quite well in more complex language. And so we then get the following overall picture. So it turns out we actually have these mechanical systems where there's internal rotation happening. No external forces are acting upon them, yet the overall mass of these systems is directly dependent on precisely how that rotation occurs within the system itself.
So there we go. Essentially, the angular momentum is the key factor here. So you're starting to see a pattern between Robert Ford's work and what you're seeing here, and also the rate of change of that is critical, and that goes all the way back to Gabriel Cron's work. Just for those people that are interested in the tools that I use to do the translation, at the top I had real-time PowerPoint translation. So typically when I'm watching these videos, what I will do is I'll get PowerPoint, I'll ask it to take the audio from the Zoom call and pipe that through a system that's available on the Mac. You can purchase this tool, and it allows you to pipe it into PowerPoint as its microphone input. And then you set the language to Russian, and then you ask it to give the subtitles real time in English. And so on the top, that is the real time translation using that methodology in PowerPoint. At the bottom, you're seeing another translation. That is a translation where you ask it to do a Russian transcript using the new tools in Adobe Premiere Pro, and then you take those and you ask it to translate that transcript that it's done in Russian into English, and you can see there's a fair bit of variation between the two. The actual audio was, and actually Shipov's voice is so clear and so well paced, it seems to do a pretty darn good job with him. It's not the case with other people, but with Shipov's it does seem to be good. That is using 11 Labs. It's a paid for service, it's quite expensive, and I use the cheapest way to do that, so it's not the best, and I can't edit it afterwards. You use triple the number of tokens to be able to edit it, in which I've done in other presentations, like the first one that I showed you tonight. But that particular one, it actually takes the voice print of the person speaking and makes a Russian version sounding accent of that person's pace and so on, and actually it did a pretty good job in that case. I think what he was showing there with that balance beam, I would like to do those experiments myself. The reason I'm saying that is because when I'm looking at the guy flicking that thing round, kind of looks a bit like he could be pushing it up to give it a predefined state. I don't know. I would prefer some sort of very defined mechanical launching device which couldn't be influenced by people giving it a slight kick in the right direction. Anyway, so there's that. So I want to go now on to Richard Eskridge's work. Richard Eskridge's work, and this was the paper that Amy sent me a link to, and you can see it. The paper code here is NASA/TM 2020 5010-911. Of course, it would have 911 on the end. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so it's called a study of the Pope-Osborne angular momentum synthesis theory. Okay, so just what we've seen, ship off showing there, the key critical aspect here is angular momentum synthesis theory, POAMs, including mathematical reformulation and validation experiment. Okay, Richard Eskridge, retired M.A. Nelson and M.P. Schoenfeld, Marshall Space Flight Center. This was the group that reached out to me and said, could I go and work with them? And I haven't responded. So yeah, I have not responded to a lot of people, to be fair, recently. So it's not personal. If you think it's personal, it isn't. I just got a lot that I'm doing right now. Okay, so let's read a bit of this abstract. This technical memorandum records results of research performed by NASA Marshall Space Flight Center under a Space Act agreement with Quantum Machines LLC, signed July the 1st, 2015. The Pope-Osborne angular momentum synthesis theory, POAMs, was evaluated and reformulated into a form which predicted a non-Newtonian spin-coupled force used to conceive and perform experiments. Rudimentary and preliminary data appears consistent with the predictions of a spin-coupled force based on the alignment of nucleons. The alignment of nucleons. And I can see what people are jumping up and down in here. They're thinking of Alzaphon theory here with aluminium and aligning those spin nuclei of the 27 aluminium, that single isotope. But additional research on the theory and experiments with careful methodologies and measurements needs to be conducted. Experiments with better measurements may be realized if effective methods for inducing nuclear alignment in the spin-active materials can be devised. So you're getting into the same kind of thinking that was being presented by Robert Forward here as being critical. The nuclear spin alignment. You know what aligns nuclear spin? Very strong magnetic field. Where can we get a really strong, highly localized point that has a very strong magnetic field? Right the way through where the gravitational field goes. I wonder where you could get that. Put your thinking caps on, guys. Okay, right. So we'll go through a couple of points here. If my computer doesn't fold, because for some reason it's so hangry here. Right, a study of the Pope-Osborne angular momentum synthesis theory, POAMs, including mathematical reformulation. NASA Marshall Flight Center was approached by quantum mechanics. The most relevant paper, an angular momentum synthesis of gravitational and electrostatic forces by Anthony Osborne and N. Vivian Pope, was presented by Quantum Machines to NASA. It was requested that NASA develop experiments and methodologies to validate the principles of the Pope-Osborne angular momentum synthesis theory, POAMs, presented in that paper. This is the record of that work performed at NASA for that purpose. So you can see what's happened here. This outside group from retired Richard Eskridge and a couple of other people in this Quantum Machines organization have come in and they've done this work at NASA. And Amy's story is they said that unless they publish it, they're going to publish it and they're just going to exclude their name because the work was done there. And you can kind of see the other side of the story and what forced this paper out. Okay. So POAMs approached Newtonian physics from the perspective of a universe based on angular momentum rather, and I'm going to move this over here so we can see a bit better, rather than linear momentum. Newton's three laws of motion are each predicated on a major assumption stated in the first law. An object in motion will stay in motion specifically along an unaltered linear path unless acted upon by an externally applied force. Pope and Osborne assert in their paper that if Newton had been more of an empiricist, that is, someone who did experiments, he would have perhaps noted that there are a few, if any, examples of linear inertial motion which are macroscopically observable, especially when it comes to motion on a planetary or cosmic scale. Subsequent advances into microscopic events also demonstrate a complete lack of natural linear inertial motion. Newton famously postulated the existence of the force of gravity to explain how objects are pulled from a naturally linear path into a closed path of elliptical orbit, with centripetal force working, there's that word again, in an opposite direction to maintain distance between one mass orbiting a larger one. It is perhaps reasonable to ask, as Pope and Osborne did, how the laws of motion might differ in their final conclusions and applications if natural inertial motion was mathematically described in terms of what is empirically observed. That motion is, in all observable cases, notably angular, not linear. The existence of well-demonstrated perihelion shifts of planetary motion is one example of how Newton's laws appears to be a close heuristic approximation of natural motion rather than a mechanistically accurate fundamental law. Indeed, Pope and Osborne attempt to eliminate the reference to linear forces in most cases, although not with consistent technical clarity. Poem's case studies. The Poem's theory was studied at NASA in some detail. The primary task of the Space Act Agreement was for NASA to design an experiment to validate Poem's theory. Poem's theory predicts that a spinning body in a circular orbit will either gain or lose a bit of apparent weight. Isn't that what we just seen Ship-Off do? A spinning body in a circular orbit will either gain or lose a bit of apparent weight due to the interaction of its spin, angular momentum, with its orbital angular momentum. So, that, in my view, what I saw in that experiment by Ship-Off that you all just saw was an aluminium disc spinning and then rotating or orbiting around a central point. And it appeared to gain or lose mass depending on the setup parameters. Osborne has a formula for the apparent modification of the universal gravitational constant, G, for spinning objects. Okay, it's not very much. Okay, you can go and read the paper, but it's not much. You need to go this is 2,000 cycles a second, and it's 2.5 kilograms and so on. But you need to get things quick. A plasma spinning at such speeds as to lose even 1 part in 10,000 would have a molecular stagnation temperature of about 10 kiloelectron volts. This corresponds to a temperature of 100 million degrees Kelvin. Clearly, such an experiment would not be feasible. Otherwise, we would already have fusion generators. A computation for a rotating flow of liquid mercury. A computation for a rotating flow of liquid mercury. What could that be like? In a 12-inch torus of 1 inch diameter was also made. For the 1 part in 10,000 change in weight, the kinetic energy of the rotating flow was equivalent to 18 kilograms of TNT. This is what I'm saying. It's dangerous when you do big lumps of metal. This is a computation. This isn't physically doing it. It's a computation. A difficult and dangerous experiment to perform. It appeared that no viable test of the Poem's system could be made in the case of a classical macrophysical spins in orbit for Earth's diameters. Okay. And you can see something here, something spinning around with a mass, and it's rotating around. This is on the mass of the Earth. Okay, and here we go. We've got something in this diagram. It's got a co-spin, so this has a spin and it's rotating around here. So this is a rotating thing spinning around in an orbit. And it's got all the mass. You can go and look at that with your pleasure. Anyway, here's some of the apparatus. Big fat motor spinning through a gear system, a rack, and on the end of that rack you have a gyroscope over here. Here you go. Here's another one. Different gyroscope here. Looks like a bit of a brass disc there. Nice spin nuclei there in the copper. 63 and 65 nucleons, spin nuclei. And you can see this rotating around here. And they give some kind of like diagrams here. Okay. Then it starts to get interesting down here where they use a bismuth rotor. Obviously, bismuth is a single isotope, which is a spin isotope. And so that's good. It's also easy to cast, so that's why they would use it. So this was the first experiment which used nucleonic spin as the origin of the spin-coupled force. So here we go. This is the apparatus. They've got it in a nice piece of plexiglass so it doesn't kill anyone when it falls apart. Or maybe it's not plexiglass, but maybe it's just something to avoid, you know, for instance, air movements and so on. And here we go. We've got the spin axis here. We've got an upper magnet here. We've got a bismuth rotor in an aluminium shell. We have a motor down here and a lower magnet assembly here. You can see these neodymium magnets on here screwed in. That's the scale, okay, on the weight scale down here. Okay, it gets interesting down here. For anti-spin, the rotor must turn opposite to the spin of the Earth. So this is something you can learn for your anti-gravity experiments. You can learn it because it's written here. For anti-spin, the rotor must turn opposite to the spin of the Earth, and the north pole of the magnet must point down so that the nuclear spin is also opposite to the spin of the Earth. The magnetic field must have a gradient so that the north pole field is stronger than the south end of the field in the rotor. This magnetic field will induce a torque on the bismuth nuclei to flip the nuclei and align them due to the nuclear moment of the atoms. This spinning rotor then mimics Barnett's cylinder and Wallace's spinning disk to align some small fraction of the nuclei. Any element with nucleonic spin could have been used for the rotor. These include lithium, beryllium, cobalt, copper, aluminium, hydrogen, sodium, rubidium. So lithium is mostly lithium 7. It's like 92.5% lithium 7, which is spin. Lithium 6, not spin. Beryllium, most basically spin. Cobalt, basically spin. Copper, 2 spin nuclei. 1 isotope in aluminium. Alzaphon used aluminium and was trying to align the spin. Hydrogen, beautiful, beautiful. 2 spin nuclei, what are they? Protium and tritium. Don't really want tritium, but when you do the maths, protium, that is 1H, has the highest spin. And if you go and look at my presentation in 2022, I said that spin was key to these processes. It is not just that a proton and atomic hydrogen have a magnetic moment, is that proton itself has spin. It has a nuclear spin, critical to the process. Okay. Sodium 23, single isotope, rubidium 87, single isotope, and so on. Okay, I think it is. Anyway, maybe not on rubidium, can't remember offhand. Metallic bismuth is a logical rotor material. Given its chemical stability and ease of fabrication, the low electrical conductivity of bismuth also helps to reduce magnetohydrodynamic currents driven in the rotor by the magnetic field. High electrical currents can heat the rotor, which acts to destroy the nucleonic alignment. So you want to keep it low heat. This device was first tested on October the 7th, 2016 at the NASA Propulsion Research Laboratory. In attendance were Richard Eskridge, Mike Nelson and Chris Meelam, the CEO of QM. The device was placed on a 6-digit O-house scale, model EX10202, with a total capacity of 10 kilograms and a resolution of 0.01 gram. Power was provided by wires which were carefully supported to minimize the effect of wire weight and flexure when the motor was operated. The device was initially operated in the anti-spin mode, which according to theory would lessen the apparent weight when the motor was operated. Upon operation, the device immediately lost about 0.3 grams. This initial loss of weight did not inspire much excitement because this weight loss could be due to thermal buoyancy or aerodynamic forces, which I have a criticism for the work we just saw from Shipov along those lines. It was then decided to configure the device for co-spin mode. This was done by flipping the rotor and magnet assemblies over, requiring a disassembly and reassembly of the device. Upon running the new configuration, the device gained 3 grams of weight. So it's lost and then gained the same amount depending on whether it's pointing up or pointing down. Okay. The weight of the rotor had apparently been counted. Yes, I see David Boulier. Welcome, David. A long time no see. And yes, Wallace Patterns. Yes, of course. He used some of these materials. These results matched the theory. The weight of the rotor had apparently been counted by 0.14%. These results matched the theory. This would correspond to only a very small alignment fraction of nuclei. So, with the magnets in play and the bismuth, there is only an incredibly small amount of the nuclei to be aligned. But already you're losing 0.14% of the mass. So, what would we need to do? We would need to increase the amount of thing that could align the nuclei, and ideally choose a nuclei that has a stronger moment of alignment when it's in alignment. And as I've already said, what is the most beneficial atom nuclei you can possibly use? It's tritium, but it's only slightly better than protium. And since tritium is radioactive, and since we don't really want that, protium is better. It's just better. Okay? So if we can get atomic hydrogen in there or protons, we are very good to go. Okay. So a large alignment was not expected due to the very weak method of excitation, physical rotation, and a magnetic field of only 2,000 Gauss. That is just 0.2, read my lips, 0.2 Tesla. 0.2 Tesla gave it a mass loss of 0.14%. That's a sensible amount of mass loss for just 0.2 of a Tesla. Okay, what did I say that the internationally funded replication of the 1970s paper, which was referenced, by the way, in the A.C. Holt field propulsion patent in 1979, they referred to this 1976 laser into a nonlinear plasma. The replication of that in 2021 in a single pulse, not a resonant system, a single pulse of a laser into a nonlinear plasma produced at the phase singularity, the topological phase singularity, the topological monopole in that single resonant, non-resonant, but single magnetohydrodynamic soliton, it produced 1.36 thousand Tesla, not 0.2, Not 2, not 20, not 200, but of the order of 2,000. So that's many orders of magnitude more magnetic strength in just that single pulse. In the Japanese work in 1976, they achieved 1,000 Tesla. 1,000 Tesla in 1976, a paper that was referenced by NASA's propulsion guy, A.C. Holt, in his paper in 1979 that showed a wheel within a wheel within a wheel electrodynamic structure that would produce a toroidal moment. Okay, well, at least a toroidal moment producing structure, not necessarily a third wheel. Okay, so 2,000 Gauss. These results would be repeated many times. It was notable. This is very interesting here. The test results were lessened each time the device was tested. After several tests, the effect would disappear altogether, which was a confusing result. The external magnetic field of the magnets was measured from test to test and did not change. When a new device was assembled with new magnets, the effect returned with equal force. It was later suspected that this was due to some phenomenon in the rare earth magnets which were used. I'm going to give a hash at what was going on. We know from the work of Bogdanovich at the Moscow Nuclear Physics Institute, where they used a cyclotron to accelerate electrons into a conversion target to produce gamma rays that went through a high-strength magnet and produced little birdies both north on one pole opposite the south and south or opposite the north, either side of the gamma line. I've shown that paper many times. They suggested that the monopole structures were being knocked off the poles of the magnets, by the gamma rays. I am suggesting that the torsion field generated by the fast spinning of the mass of matter is pulling those topological monopoles, those energy solitons, those exotic vacuum objects off the poles of the neodymium and whatever they are, rare earth magnets, and aggregating them, producing the effect. And that it is producing a zone outside of which it's captured all of the ambient monopoles. Why do I say this? Because this is exactly what was observed by Alexander Shishkin. His cavitator worked, and then when it didn't work, doing the emission of the structures, and he had to turn it off and move it to a different place in the lab. I argue that the new magnets that they were putting on had aggregated the poles. We know the monopoles are collected by magnets. We know this 100%. We know this because of the exploding wire experiments of Leonid Oroitskiev. Leonid Oroitskiev in 2000, 2001 to 2003, he did exploding titanium wires in water. He produced ball lightnings above, which broke into micro ball lightning, and he produced these tractor tracks, these strange radiation tracks, but using iron 57, 0.7 meters away, one with the north on the backside and one with the south on the backside ferrite magnets. He collected monopole structures which changed the fine constant of the iron 57 plates that were on compared to a control one way or the other. So I'm arguing very specifically that those neodymium magnets lost their monopoles off their surfaces. They still had the field there, but they didn't have, because of the spin inside the ceramic of the neodymium iron boron, let's say, the ceramic, the spin of the actual nuclei are producing the magnetic field, but they had lost their monopoles from the surface. So it's not explained by Richard Estridge, but I think it is explained by the things that you should know because we've gone through those papers in the past. And I think that if you have a system that is able to construct the topological monopoles by creating charge separation and then causing coherence in electrons, okay, and making them virial stable by allowing them to have the right number of ions in association with those in the right coherent state, then you are synthesizing the monopoles that you need to produce to produce the topological effect, which leads to the anti-gravity and or propulsion effect. Okay. So we go on, where are we? Have I got something down here? Okay, I don't know why. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so that's 2 Tesla. Yeah, so I've got it here, torsion strips monopoles from the magnets. Okay. The version 3, oh God, where were we? The version 3 device was rebuilt to produce a version 4 device, which was much easier to switch from anti-spin mode to co-spin mode. Okay, so they've got the version 4 device here, anti-spin and co-spin mode. Okay. And we have a diagram here. The V4 had a stainless steel 304 machined outer shell, which reduced the magnetohydrodynamic heating effect compared to the aluminium outer shell of the version 3. Radio link remote control and onboard battery power was used on the V4 to permit wireless operation. That prevents any wire problems that you might have had to answer for in the previous version. Blah, 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 blah. A picture of the V4 rotor, which was constructed by casting bismuth into stainless steel 304 shell, is shown in figure 9. Okay, so here we go. This is the milled billet into which they would pour bismuth, and it would be the basis of the rotor. Okay. After these first successful results, the experimental efforts were taken out of NASA to QM facilities. NASA Marshall Space Flight Center helped QM build a new rotor device called the V5. The V5 had improved framing, a new magnet cage assembly, better bearings, instrumented motors, and a data acquisition system. Successful tests produced high quality data, and they were conducted with the version 5 at QM. This V5 data and the V5 itself remains in possession of QM. And you can sort of start seeing a little bit of a kind of like, this is the wording we're going to agree to put in here. It's saying no further work was conducted at NASA Marshall Space Flight Center after construction and initial tests of the V5 due to lack of additional Space Act funding by QM. So QM was meant to fund NASA in order to do the research. NASA got up to building the V5, but because NASA could not be funded by QM, they couldn't do something else. So you can see that there might have been a little bit of a conflict between the two in interests here. And it might have been my precious and so on. The work at NASA has not continued due to limitations imposed during the Space Act proprietary period. At the time of this writing, this proprietary period has ended and NASA may therefore continue the research without limitation if desired. Right, so apparently with the Space Act, maybe a person coming in, proposing an idea can have support as long as the funding is shared between this proposer and NASA. But during a certain period of time, they can't talk about it and so on. But after that period is over, then NASA can go ahead. So did they go ahead? I don't know. I don't know whether they did. Conclusions. Reformulation of the poem's equations enable the conception of experiments for testing of the theory. Simple experiments were conducted at NASA Marshall Space Flight Center for the purposes of exploring the existence of spin-coupled force. Rudimentary and preliminary data appears consistent with the predictions of a spin-coupled force based on the alignment of nucleons in a spin-active atomic material, but additional research needs to be conducted on the theory and experiments with careful methodologies and measurements. Stronger measurements may be realized if the effective methods for inducing nuclear alignment in spin-active materials can be devised. Right. Stronger measurements may be realized if effective methods for inducing nuclear alignment in spin-active materials can be devised. There we go. Boom. That, my friends, is, in my view, compliant with Robert Ford's proposals, compliant with the poem's theory, and it is what goes on in a water-exposed fractal magnetohydrodynamic structure. Why? Because the intense charge separation going on leads to breakdown of water, let's say, and you get magnetic oxygen, highly paramagnetic oxygen, and a little bit magnetic hydrogen and or atomic hydrogen. So protons, not hydrogen, sorry, atomic hydrogen or protons coming in with their magnetic moments or paramagnetic state into the nucleus, the phase singularity and fractal phase singularities of these structures. And the magnetic strength builds and builds and builds. And we're going to look at a translation I've done of Wisniewski's paper from 2008, which currently is being deeply analysed by Jan Rack, who worked at national labs in the US, and he worked at CERN. He's currently looking at that. He's kind of blown away by it, to be honest. I had a full day session walking him through where my logic is in what's going on in these processes. But I suggest to you that we already have data from 1976 referenced in the A.C. Holt paper in 1979. The laser induced into a nonlinear plasma toroidal vortex soliton with the phase singularity as represented physically, as presented in the 2021 replication, produces a field in a single pulse, not a resonant system, of 1.36 thousand Tesla. You combine paramagnetic oxygen and the magnetic moment of a proton or a atomic hydrogen, and it goes into that intense magnetic strength field in the core. And I would suggest to you that the second most suitable isotope given to us by nature, that is protium, that is a single proton, to do spin alignment will be spin aligned in the topological monopole. And if you can get an incredibly small fraction of bismuth in a situation like this, with just 2,000 Gauss, that is 0.2 of a Tesla, to lose 0.14% of its weight, I submit to you that you will be able to produce a vectorizable propulsion force out of this. And once you've got propulsion, you automatically get unlimited energy. You just put it on a crank and let it turn. Okay, so I'm now going to show you in the next clip from Shipov, and I think it's going to blow your mind. You're going to find out that they kept something secret. Specifically, Werner von Braun kept something secret for 50 years until 2008. And I don't even know who knows that this has been not secret since 2008. But you're going to see it now.
And now here are a few examples of how Newton's mechanics were violated because inertial forces were not taken into account when calculating trajectories. So this was the first launch of the American satellite Explorer on January 31st, 1958. That is 1958. They launched a brand new satellite. It was the Explorer 1 satellite. So what exactly do you see here? It turns out the last thing to note was the satellite itself was spinning around its own central axis at approximately 720 revolutions per minute. Effectively, the satellite was functioning as a gyroscope. That's roughly 12 full rotations per second, an absolutely incredible speed. And just consider this, it was launched from Cape Canaveral. Well, during the ascent to orbit, the engine was, of course, operating, and for a distance of 200 to 300 kilometers, the engine continued to work. But primarily, of course, Tsiolkovsky's rocket equation was applied there, considering the principles of reactive propulsion. But then he was traveling at 20,500, already in flight when he reached orbit. And when they compared the calculated orbits with the actual orbit that it was displaying, the difference was almost 1,000 kilometers, specifically 956 kilometers. And this wasn't just an isolated incident. 11 explorers were launched, and every single time this kind of calculation error occurred, even though absolutely everything had been taken into account. So then Werner von Braun, who was involved in all of this, approached American physicists. He held the view that he had discovered an anomaly in motion within Newton's theory of gravity. He believed we were missing something, that there were corrections somewhere we hadn't accounted for. This was something that kept happening on a regular basis. So from the point of view of what I mean by this is that we simply didn't take into account a specific equation, the one that's written right here. When the satellite was rotating, that is, its own inherent rotation, these particular forces were acting upon it. Now, to determine which of them, you would need to specifically know the initial conditions and all the launch parameters. And all of this was classified for 50 years, can you imagine? It turned out to be incredibly important for fundamental physics, but for military purposes, apparently for national defense, it was also extremely significant, and it was kept secret. But this is the first point. Pause. Now, the second experiment. Pause. This is an experiment, you see, which was conducted by an American. The scientist Bruce De Palma in the year 1970. Look at this simple experiment. So he had a special drill that would impart a spin to the balls. 27,000 revolutions per minute, a drill that was spinning incredibly fast, and on top of that, it would shoot out these little balls, these steel balls, I mean, with a diameter. Right here, the diameter was 2.5 centimeters. And so, when the little ball was spinning, he would record its trajectory using a stroboscopic device, at 60 frames per second, right? Well, in a specific manner, the trajectory when the ball was spinning, that's depicted at the top. And when the ball was simply fired without any rotation, they were distinctly different from one another. And if we were to somehow translate this correction to the acceleration of free fall, then it turns out, you see this particular trajectory. It means that delta G was actually increasing here. Whereas here, for the lower trajectory, it behaves as if delta G was effectively decreasing. G is the change in the acceleration of free fall, but the acceleration of free fall itself did not change. Instead, the trajectory was altered by the action of the force of inertia. In that, in this particular case, in this one, no. So if we were to write down the equation of motion for a spinning sphere, it turns out that within this particular equation, a third derivative actually emerges. Usually, we only ever use the second derivative in Newtonian mechanics. But in this specific type of mechanics, a third derivative appears, which incorporates the concepts of torsion and the ball's rotation. Well, this is the kind of formula that we have here. This means there's always an additional term specifically related to the higher derivative, the third one, and this is a characteristic feature for all experiments that involve any form of rotation. But truthfully, depending on different conditions, this inherent self-rotation might not even be a part of this equation. In principle, we should expect changes, additions to the usual equation, which is simply the second derivative and also the third derivative. If it's a non-relativistic three-dimensional case. If the case is relativistic and four-dimensional, then the fourth derivative also comes into play and begins to operate. This is simply a comment now that I've had the chance to get acquainted with this. And here's another experiment. Actually, this Galileo experiment with a gyroscope freely falling in a vacuum chamber was conducted by Japanese scientist Hayasaka. Pause. Well, here they are. So what did they notice? Pause. And The device is very well made. Here's the evacuated vacuum chamber. A gyroscope is hanging here and a laser beam is at one height, then another. Upon command, the gyroscope is activated. It starts spinning, right? And passing a laser beam, it registers its position there to calculate the time and movement coordinates. And when it's almost falling here, the second measurement is also taken, everything is processed, and it turned out that the fall time, it was of course compared with both a non-rotating and a rotating freely falling gyroscope. They differ, it's given for 4 times 10 to the minus 5th seconds. This corresponds to a delta G correction, here 1 to 1.5 centimeters per second. So these are all measurable things at such a very short distance. Here, 120 centimeters, well, about 1.7 meters, right? So it already has an effect even at such a distance. And on this, these works published way back in 1997. But you understand, leading physicists, generally speaking, never really pay any mind to such matters, because then they are faced with a dilemma. Either they must fundamentally change Newtonian mechanics or simply close their eyes to what truly exists. And so they invariably choose the second, simpler path.
As a matter of fact, we end up having to learn all of these things afterwards.
And of course, the Janibekov effect, which is well known to everyone. It's so magical, I simply must show it to you. This is a nut in zero gravity. Moving at a certain speed, it actually changes its direction of rotation. You see, its spin changes, a quantized spin in space. So the very first point is that aerodynamics significantly impacts the rotation, leading to precession and subsequently a full somersault. However, they then took some plasticine and completely covered it, yet the final result remained precisely the same. The result is exactly the same. Here's the sealed up nut. It's also the same thing, but it travels a shorter distance because the mass has changed the shape and so forth, right? And if we look at how it is here, the points of this particular body are constantly undergoing changes. And here, this blue curve, it actually represents the very end of the spin vector. There it is, exactly. Well, what this essentially means is that certain specific points on this very nut, they are moving, you see, approximately along these kinds of spiral-like paths. In other words, they're being accelerated. And simultaneously, they're also moving due to inertia. The motion is accelerated and inertial. This is always possible, as theoreticians know, only in non-Euclidean geometry. Locally, we considered the geometry in the satellite to be Euclidean. Theorists know it's non-local, meaning if you move away from the satellite center to some distance from its central point, then you'll find additions related to curvature. Calculations show this. And here locally, meaning that this is Euclidean space. And yet this very Euclidean space possesses some additional intrinsic properties that describe the rotation of objects. This means that we have always worked with translational movements. And all of this occurred, and we described it within the external space. And once we shifted to describing the body's own rotational motion, we then required a certain intrinsic notion of internal space. And without it, it becomes exceedingly difficult to clarify why this phenomenon takes place. And so I presented a straightforward formula. E represents the total energy of a rotating object. mv squared divided by 2 plus j omega squared divided by 2. And the energy, 1/2 mv squared, that is kinetic energy. It's essentially the external energy of this particular body. However, 1/2 j omega squared, that represents the internal energy. We must distinguish between the space of rotation internally and the space of translation externally. Our intuition is accustomed to translational space, the space of translation, because all theories so far, all theories from Newton's mechanics to general relativity, no one has ever used angular coordinates as elements of space. Yes, they were involved behind the scenes because spin particles, for example, we always describe using Euler's formalisms, changes in spin and so on, but it was never stated that these are properties intrinsically linked to the very nature of space itself. Well, here's another interesting phenomenon, the weight loss of a precessing gyroscope. So take a look at this.
10 grams.
The gyroscope, you see, it's not spinning, and it weighs 710 grams.
710 grams?
And now he will force him.
Okay.
88 grams, then 708 grams, and this keeps repeating. I personally conducted these experiments on scales, which were protected from the external atmosphere by a glass casing, special scales for weighing precious stones, meaning they were accurate to 1/100 of a gram. And the gyroscope weighing 76 grams is roughly the same percentage somewhere there. He was showing us the weight loss. So I want to draw your attention once again to the fact that this is described in this very textbook. The Theoretical Mechanics course for physicists, page 359. Yes, it's mentioned there, but there's no specific calculation for a particular device. That is, a precessing gyroscope loses its weight. This is an experimental fact. How to describe it is a somewhat different question. So, this is also a pendulum, and it's a quite well-known experiment. This is Maxwell's pendulum. It's a gyroscope suspended by threads on a crossbar within a gravitational field. So with its own weight of 929.8 grams, when the pendulum operates, its weight changes by 6.6 grams. Right here, it's clearly shown the change in weight. 6 and 6, it's highlighted below. So look, its center of mass moves at different velocities with different acceleration, and rotational energy converts into translational. We usually thought, and we were taught, I remember from school, that the energy of rotational motion and the energy of translational motion, they are additive. You need to add them, just like in that formula I already spoke to you about. There they are additive, but in life, no, they are not. There's an intrinsic link between the system's translational motion and its internal rotation, and Maxwell's pendulum demonstrates exactly that. All of this can be verified numerically, demonstrating that essentially the formula we introduced back then, m depends on omega, signifies that the system's rest mass is dependent on omega. This entire system as a whole, in a black box, before the pendulum even started operating, weighs exactly 1,929. And when we launch the pendulum type pose, then these scales will indicate a weight loss of 6.6 grams. And as just a pose, this means that something occurred internally, pose rotational and translational energy exchanged in such a manner, pose which ultimately resulted in contributing to weight loss. When the translational acceleration changes, I've said before, that is also a form of rotation. Translational acceleration, what was occurring was essentially an exchange of rotation within the Euler angles of this specific device, which then transformed into rotation within the space-time angles. And such a phenomenon, it turns out, is indeed observed in nature.
Well, what do you think of that? So yes, as he said there, when they were sending up the first satellites in America in 1958, and repeatedly afterwards, the Newtonian gravitational equations failed epically. We can conclude that Newtonian mechanics was completely cooked from 1958. And they knew this, and they kept it secret because they wanted to drop missiles on other people and they wanted to have this up their sleeve until 2008. Yes. When you insert angular momentum into these systems, the rules change. Okay? And there is no straight lines in nature at all, ever. Things do not move in a straight line. Yes. So gravity equations from Newton are cooked. They're useful at various levels of education for getting people into a certain mindset, but they are not useful. Now, my friend Stoyan Sarg here, you'll notice I've actually switched the camera around so we're actually able to read things now. He gave me this book in 2014, or rather I might purchase it, I don't know, he gave me one book at least, called Field Propulsion. In here it shows his patent, and it actually shows an extra couple of diagrams you can't see in his patent online. It has this nice little UFO over here and this tic-tac shape here, and it has these three spheres at the end. They're driven by Tesla coils, and it has this rotating mass in here, which is also driven by field across this thing here with this resonant heterodyne mechanism. But when I was looking through this, and I haven't read the whole thing, so I'm sorry, Stoyan, but I was looking at his summary and conclusions here on page 123. And he's saying here, the author focused particularly on experiments in the field of electrogravity, electrodynamics, plasmodynamics, plasma thrust actuators, paraelectric actuators, Hall effect plasma thrusters, and so on. Amongst the advanced researchers in the USA are the research groups of J.R. Roth at University of Tennessee and S. Roy at the University of Florida. I thought, oh my God, J.R. Roth. This is the guy that I was told worked with NASA on propulsion technologies. And he was also the guy that after Dr. Takaaki Matsumoto was banned from being able to publish in the American Nuclear Society's journal Fusion Technology in 1994, submitted a paper in 1994 that was published in May 1995, which said, what can ball lightning teach the fusion community? So I thought, he was working on Hall effect plasma thrusters and so on, the advanced researchers, J.R. Roth. And so I thought I'd look up J.R. Roth. I'd never really looked to see what other work he'd done. And here it is. Here is a paper by J.R. Roth. And it's called Operation of Fusion Reactors in 1 Atmosphere of Air Instead of Vacuum Systems. Okay? UT Plasma Sciences Laboratory, Plasma ECE UTK Edu, Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, University of Tennessee. Engineering design studies of both magnetic and inertial fusion power plants have assumed that plasma will undergo fusion reactions in a vacuum environment. Operation under vacuum requires an expensive additional major system for the reactor, a vacuum vessel with vacuum pumping, and raises the possibility of sudden unplanned outages if the vacuum containment is breached. It would be desirable in many respects if fusion reactors could be made to operate at 1 atmosphere with air surrounding the plasma, thus eliminating the requirement of a pressure vessel and vacuum pumping. This would have obvious economic reliability and engineering advantages for currently envisaged power plant reactors. It would make possible forms of reactor control not possible under vacuum conditions, i.e. adiabatic compression of fusion plasma by increasing the pressure of surrounding gas. It would allow reactors used as aircraft engines to operate as turbojets or ramjets in the atmosphere. It would also allow reactors as fusion rockets to take off from the surface of the Earth instead of low Earth orbit. Okay, so he goes into what you need for a normal reactor, and he shows this Japanese tokamak here, JT60. And you can see this, the actual tokamak is in the middle here, right, this bit here. But there's this huge apparatus around the outside. And what is that apparatus? Well, here is the actual tokamak core. But it has all of these ports around the outside, and these ports are for adding the vacuum to it. And the vacuum system is this part of the device. It's huge. It's absolutely monstrous. So you can see what his logic is here. His logic is, let's not have to have this massive vacuum system to get this thing work. Isometric drawing of the JT60 tokamak vacuum pumping system in its original toroidal diverter configuration, drawing courtesy of the Japanese fusion research establishment Tokai. The cost and complexity of the entire vacuum system can be understood in reference to Figure 3, an isometric drawing of the JT60 vacuum vessel and pumping system. This illustration makes clear a large surface area risk for catastrophic leaks and the highly sophisticated machine tooling needed to fabricate, assemble and test this subsystem to assure its vacuum and structural integrity. Prior studies of atmospheric pressure fusion reactors in the early decades of fusion research, serious consideration was given to operating steady-state fusion reactors surrounded by neutral gases. And one of these ones was the 1973 Paul Collock patent that was awarded and actually was referred to by J.R. Roth in his 1995 paper, which I have done a detailed discussion on both of those in the past, both his 1995 paper and the 1973 Paul Collock patent. You can go and find those on the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project's YouTube channel. The ability to operate a fusion reactor at 1 atmosphere expands its potential uses to fusion-powered turbojet and ramjet aircraft engines and to fusion rockets that can be launched from the surface of the Earth instead of being assembled and launched from the vacuum of low Earth. And this now fully explains to me why a military guy reached out to me after we did our first replication of Francesco Celani's reactor in 2012 and asked me this, what I thought at the time was completely off the wall question as can this work with scramjets? I now understand why. The possibility of operating fusion reactor at ambient air instead of a vacuum system was put forward in the early days of fusion by Tsien, who estimated that thermal losses through an unmagnetized boundary layer surrounding a DD plasma operating at 1 atmosphere would be such that sustained operation would require plasma greater than 100 meters in diameter. Somewhat later, H. Alfven, our friend Alfven, and E. Smars, and H. Alfven and C.G. Faltamer put forward a gas blanket concept in which reacting thermonuclear plasma is insulated from the walls by relatively cool, magnetized, partially ionized layer of gas at high pressure. Such a gas blanket would possess a relatively low thermal conductivity due to the magnetized hot ion plasma near the central reacting plasma. Okay, going on, he has some diagrams, he shows the magnetic wall, and so on. And here's the money shot. Ball lightning as a high energy density atmospheric plasma, pressure plasma. The most convincing argument for fusion reactor capable of operating at 1 atmosphere in the air would, of course, be an actual fusion reactor operating under these conditions. In the absence of steady-state fusion reactors of any description to test this possibility, one must appeal to the existence and stability of other forms of high energy density atmospheric pressure plasma, such as the toroidal electrical arc described by Alfven and Smars, or the high pressure shock heated plasma of Gross. Ball lightning is another example of a stable, high energy density plasma existing in atmospheric air. It is usually seen in association with thunderstorms, but otherwise occurs at random times and places. Natural ball lightning has been described in the monograph by Barry, and its implications of ball lightning for fusion energy and the plasma research community have been discussed previously by the present author, 6 to 8, at previous symposia. Ball lightning is characteristically seen by untrained observers without instruments who are in the midst of frightening experience. Now, bearing in mind, this here was before they observed the ball lightning. This was in 2009. So the ball lightning that was observed in China and got the spectrum, I think, was in 2011 or 2000, something around 2014 or something. Okay. So it was after this. Ball lightning has not been accessible to scientific study because it cannot yet be reproducibly generated in laboratory. Although no measurements are available to shed light on its ion energies or number densities, it has many characteristics of fusion relevance, as indicated in Table 1. These characteristics include lifetimes from 1 to more than 90 seconds, energy densities higher than that of DT fusion plasma, diameters that range up to more than 1 meter, and kinetic pressures of the same magnitude as DT fusion reactor plasmas. So it's got some properties there that make it align with fusion plasmas. Possibly the most interesting feature of ball lightning is that its energy source apparently arises from stored magnetic energy. Stored magnetic energy rather than chemical reactions arises from stored magnetic energy rather than chemical reactions. The reasoning behind this statement is based on figure 7. This figure here, percentage of ball lightning observations with energy density less than indicated on the abscissa. Okay, why? The reasoning behind this statement is based on figure 7, taken from Barry, which shows the cumulative distribution function of energy density of 13 ball lightning events for which enough information was available to calculate the energy density. These data lie on a straight line on a log-normal probability paper, indicating a log-normal distribution of energy density. The fact that the data lie along a single straight line implies that these ball lightning events arise from a single physical cause, since it is likely that if two distinct physical processes were responsible, there would be a change in the slope of the curve at the point where one physical process left off and the other took over. Good logic. The data on figure 7 can also be used to rule out chemical explanations of ball lightning. So that gets rid of the Abrahamson and Dennis model, okay, which came out in 2000. This is 2008-9. Since one of the most energetic chemical explosives known, TNT, has an energy density of 2,000 joules per cubic centimeter, and examples of ball lightning have been observed with energy densities well above this value. If ball lightning is not energized by stored chemical energy, then stored magnetic energy is the most credible remaining possibility. So here we have this guy. We have this guy that worked with NASA, and you're going to see that he worked with NASA on the kind of technologies that allow things to fly quickly. Okay? He did. The head of the NASA laboratory told me that himself in a personal email to me, that J.R. Roth did work with NASA. Okay? Before he died. Not, well, I don't know if J.R. Roth is dead, but the head of NASA research. Okay? So we have a situation here where they are specific, or J.R. Roth is saying the data can only be explained effectively by a single cause, and that single cause effectively must be stored magnetic energy. How do we get stored magnetic energy? Well, we know, because by looking at structures under the microscope on the late Neil Crichton Gould's experiments, and by looking at various quantization levels on John Hutchison's metal samples, I derived a fractal magnetohydrodynamic structure. That led us to observe in Vega experiments by Henk Uren physical manifestations of the collapsed wave functions that produce these intense fractal magnetohydrodynamic structures, and I sent those to the Russians, and almost instantly I got back the bagel game, which is currently being funded for research in Australia. Okay, and you will have seen that Chris, who's been following my work, who's a former Australian Air Force pilot, already received funding for previous work on this from the Australian government, and that research into the bagels is going forward. And what does a bagel do? Well, it produces wheels within wheels within wheels, which lead to a magnetic core. And we know from the mathematical work of of Nevesky, published in 1993 in the Russian journal Electricity, that it produces this stable structure, and according to it is fractal, but it leads to the Poynting vector and the electromagnetic energy being trapped into a loop with a wheel within a wheel within a wheel. And when you have a wheel within a wheel within a wheel within a wheel, you get a loop that links into another loop. And when one collapses, the other one comes up. So here we have, in 2008, 9, around about the same time that David Freiberger was funded by the US Department of Energy to look into what could explain cavity light, that is ball lightning forming in superconducting chambers, in the early 2000s in another national lab. In 2009, he published a paper where he showed that the same kind of treatment as Nevesky led to vacuum currents. That is electromagnetic energy trapped, and that was sufficient to cause the decay of baryons when it gets to a certain threshold. What are baryons? They are protons and electrons. Okay? So, how do we get to the topological monopole that does all of this magic? Well, in the work of Moscow Nuclear Physics Institute under Bogdanovich, if you go and look at his 2019 paper on video recordings of long-lived plasmoids, you can go and find it from my YouTube, or you can go and find it from the YouTube, or you can go and find it from remoteview.icu. Look up Bogdanovich. He suggests that the monopole-like structures that they observe in their electrical discharges in water vapor, in water flow plasma discharges, could be explained by the type of monopole structures he's seeing, could be explained by the paper by Wisniewski. He's not saying that paper does explain it, and I'm not saying that paper does explain it, but something like that would explain it. Now, I have translated that, and I've nearly completed producing a good translation, and I put translations on the GIF images that were in there, but actually right now Jan Rack is producing vector in latex, so there will be a better version of this paper out. But I just want to go through this paper here. It's called Superconductivity of the Dirac Monopole by R.P. Wisniewski, May 2008 in Sochi. And this was at a cold nuclear transmutation and ball lightning presentation. It's the same conference series that you just saw the presentation that I recorded at the start by Zatalepin, talking about the rotating dielectric mass, but also the ball lightnings, and also the work of Shipov, that I've shown 2 videos tonight from the presentation that he gave on Wednesday this week, which I did some translations of parts of that. And I will share the full presentation as soon as I possibly can. Anyway, abstract. The modern theory of low temperature superconductivity is based on the concept of a macroscopic quantum state of superconductor, convincingly confirmed by the quantization of magnetic flux circulating in a superconducting ring. The discovery of the Josephson effect solidified researchers' confidence in this theory. Numerous experimental data have confirmed the macroscopic nature of the phenomenon and revealed the remarkable consistency of the Josephson relation for the non-stationary effect. This article attempts to describe superconductivity, particularly the Josephson effect, using principles of classical electrodynamics, linking the Dirac monopole, a self-organized electromagnetic system responsible for Cooper pair formation and phase coherence. Linking the Cooper pair formation and phase coherence. And just to kind of refer back to the laser into nonlinear plasma, this is dynamics of moving electron vortices and magnetic ring in laser plasma interaction. And here you can see the laser goes into the plasma, it produces a vortex and an anti-vortex, okay? And you can see here what I was talking about. This is trillion volts per meter, so 10 to the power 12 volts per meter. And you can see at the front end, it's going down to 1.8 trillion volts per meter negative, and at the back end it's going up to 1.8 positive trillion volts per meter. This is 3.6 trillion volts per meter is the charge separation that you get at the front of the vortex and the anti-vortex. Okay, and here are this kind of spiral patterns that the electrons go through when they're going in there, so they're all bit churned up as they're in there. And I showed you various structures here that you get, and we saw these on various samples that we looked at. But here is the money shot here. And what you're looking at here, if you look at they fired a laser into this nonlinear plasma. You can see the typical magnetohydrodynamic flow pattern here, and the focus beam into the dead center here. You can see here the magnetohydrodynamic structure and flow pattern on the back wall. This is your hexagonal kind of ring structure here with a spot in the middle. This is the magnetic, these are isomagnetic field parts on the torus, and isomagnetic field here. So this is a field strength of 1.36 thousand Tesla. You can see down here 1.36 thousand Tesla. Okay, so it's 1.36 thousand Tesla to a dead stop. This is the phase singularity. This is the phase singularity. Okay, so what did they do to do this? They had a bunch of plasma in here, non-linear, and they fired a laser into it, producing extreme hydrodynamic shear. The extreme hydrodynamic shear formed this soliton. It's self-organized, and it produced this intense magnetic field. And this is over 20 microns, this structure. Okay, the smaller it is, it goes up exponentially in terms of the field strength. Okay, if it goes out, it goes down exponentially. Okay, and it's all discussed in this paper. Okay, so we go back to the Wisniewski paper. So essentially what I'm saying is you need charge separation, you need multi-axis hydrodynamic shear. So you saw those images from 2018 of Zatalepin showing that if you've got a laminar flow going along a surface, then it will just, sorry, if you've just got a laminar flow, it'll stay as a laminar flow. But if you've got a laminar flow going along a surface and you get shearing, this goes slower, this goes faster, and it starts to produce turbulence and vorticity. Okay? And so this is what I'm saying is you need charge separation and magnetohydrodynamic shear. In the thunderstorm generator, the charge separation, in my view, occurs when the mist of water comes into the hot thing, and it does exactly what I said in the very first presentation on the matter before I'd seen it running, was the Armstrong electrostatic boiler. It flashes that water to steam, you get massive charge separation, you even get some thermal splitting of the water, ideally catalytic with the choices of the metal and the temperature if it gets over 650 degrees centigrade, and then you get this formation of these self-organized charge structures. Okay, and then they go on to produce the core that produces the magnetic strength necessary to create a virial structure. Okay, and if you rinse and repeat this and keep going on and giving it more helicity, more multi-axis hydrodynamic shear, you'll end up with what we see in the structures that we see inside the reactor of Binjuan Huang in a cavitation sense, and that leads us to doing all of the magic of transmutation and energy synthesis. Okay, all right. So, introduction. The modern theory of low temperature superconductivity is based on the idea of macroscopic quantum state of the superconductor, which is convincingly confirmed by the quantization of the magnetic flux circulating in a superconducting ring. The discovery of the Josephson effect finally convinced researchers of the validity of this theory. Numerous experimental data have confirmed the macroscopic nature of the phenomenon and revealed the extreme consistency of the Josephson relationship for non-stationary effect. However, the deep mechanisms of the phenomena remained hidden from researchers due to the inability of quantum mechanics to reveal the processes leading to the spatial and phase quantization of microparticles in the superconductor. Is it even necessary to clarify the physical mechanisms of the Josephson effect when one of the leading experts on superconductivity, V. Parker, believes that the Josephson effect relation can be derived completely from completely general assumptions and is therefore exact. Moreover, the author of the effect himself, B. Josephson, in his Nobel lecture on physics, expressed the opinion that the whole theory apparently has only mathematical interest, as was soon assumed by some authors. One cannot agree with this opinion. The theory of electron-phonon interaction has left in the shadows the true reasons for the consistency of the Josephson relation. It turns out that the organized behavior of Cooper pairs in a superconductor is associated with another mystery of physics, the Dirac monopole. It is the monopole that collects electrons into Cooper pairs and organizes the pairs themselves into spatial and phase order. It is precisely the Dirac monopole that ensures the high consistency of the Josephson relation. This article attempts to describe the phenomenon of superconductivity and in particular the Josephson effect based on the principles of classical electrodynamics. At the beginning of the 20th century, electrodynamics was struck by a crisis. It was unable to describe the quantum processes of the micro world, particularly the dualism of microparticles. As a result, a new branch of science was born, wave or quantum physics. One of the fundamental relations of this new science is the de Broglie formula, which relates the wavelength and momentum of a microparticle regardless of its nature and contains no hint of electricity or magnetism. This, like many other equations of quantum mechanics, has a gravitational character. In essence, classic electrodynamics is a theory of gravity for microbodies with super high linear and angular velocities. In essence, classical electrodynamics is a theory of gravity for microbodies with super high linear and angular velocities. And to go, you actually have to go back to 1889 or 1880 something for Heaviside, and then you look at the early 210s, papers of Thuring, Lenz, and maybe I'll share those in the blog. However, the units of measurement for electrical and magnetic quantities do not allow for adequate description of these processes. To address this, it would be logical to express the units of electromagnetism in absolute system of units. Okay, so he creates this absolute systems of units, which we're still debating as to whether it's useful to try and compare different units, okay? And like the Bohr magneton and equation for the electron and so on. So, but essentially, it comes down to these physical representations of the concept of what he's getting at. When A, the angle of inclination of the microparticle's velocity vector to the magnetic induction vector B, here, the charged particle rotates in a circular as shown in figure 1. So this charged particle is going around in a circular rotation around the magnetic field. We know this occurs. Okay. Here B is the vector of induction of homogeneous magnetic field. Now you'll see that in Rossi's latest patent, he has a 2 Tesla homogeneous magnetic field through which he fires a whole bunch of electrons. Okay? All right. The angular velocity of particle coincides with the magnetic field and is equal to it. The motion of the electron E with velocity v orb creates a current in the orbit loop equal to this current here, where v orb is the cyclic frequency, I orb is the current and the orbital in the orbital circuit. So it creates a current in this loop. Okay, so the magnetic field causes this to orbit and the orbit causes the magnetic field. Okay, so you start to get the basis of a virial solution. Actually, if you go back to Roth here, in here, he goes on about it. In fact, at one point, it's the first time I've seen it discussed in a paper. Well, maybe it's not in this one, but he talks about virial solution. Okay, this current flows opposite to the electron's motion and creates a reactive according to Lenz's law magnetic field, the induction of which is at the center of the orbit is equal to this. So the magnetic field causes it to orbit, the orbit causes the magnetic field. Okay, so it's kind of, you can already see the basis, the self-organization. In other words, the magnetic the magnitude of the magnetic field induction vector created by the rotation of a charged particle is smaller than its angular velocity by a factor equal to the ratio of the electron's radius to the radius of its orbit. The translation of the remaining electrodynamic quantities into an absolute system of units is straightforward, and an interested reader can complete this work themselves. Below, all the values of electromagnetic quantities are presented in kilograms meters a second. This is what he's done. To avoid confusion, the terms and notations, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so he does Coulomb's law. The force of interaction between two electric charges, Q1 and Q2, is equal to their product divided by the square. I'm not going to go into the equations. I'm just going to go and talk through the diagrams after a bit about Cooper pairs. Cooper proposed that electrons in low-temperature superconductors form pairs, leading to microscopic theory emphasizing phase coherence. Zero resistance and flux quantization stem from this coherence, as confirmed experimentally. What overcomes Coulomb repulsion to form Cooper pairs, and what aligns them into phase coherence? That is the key. Most theories invoke electron-phonon interactions, while some propose exotic mechanisms like excitons, where excitons are where a photon interacts with an electron to create an exciton, okay? All agree that the host material's atoms facilitate pairing, okay? In heavy fermion superconductors, effective electron masses exceed 100 times the mass, often due to ions with unpaired F-shell magnetic moments. Magnetic sources exist in both exotic and conventional superconductors, enabling superconductivity. Consider the forces. Okay, so it goes down the forces. And then what it's basically saying is, when you have a magnetic vector and you have the electrons spiraling in, because they are repelling and attracting, they will end up 180 degrees out of phase towards a magnetic core, producing a vortex down to that core. Okay? And I'm saying that the kind of magnetohydrodynamic structure you see here creates the magnetic core into which electrons go in a golden ratio triangle into a vortex into that core. Okay? So you actually have to have charge separated particles going into a vortex which is unstable, but then it produces a system by which the electrodynamics allow for the electrons to come into phase, into a phase singularity in here, and then the magnetic strength there starts to produce a virial solution that holds this structure together, because this ends up with a magnetic effectively structure here. The strong, very focused pole out of here and the spread pole over here can then link together into fractal structures that then build in their stability and so on. So this produces the magnetic core with the vortex electric field, and then we come down and the electrons spiral in this logarithmic spiral trajectory, and you end up with two of them coming in out of phase from each other, but ultimately ending 180 degrees out of phase, producing Cooper pair electrons. Okay, and so they come in, they end up out of phase, and then if we blow up this central structure here, we then have a ring of electrons which are coherent. And so this goes down to a specific radius here, and when you work it out, it produces unimaginable strength magnetic fields. And we've already shown that atomic hydrogen and a proton have a magnetic moment. It's about 1,700 times less that of a oxygen atom, a molecule rather, and ozone and an oxygen radical also have magnetic moments. All forms of oxygen, the other component of water, have a magnetic moment. Oxygen 17, I have said, preferentially stays in the core in Benjamin Huang's work. The reason I say that is not only it's got magnetic moment, it also has a nuclear spin. The combination of the two means it preferentially gets stayed in there, and that's why they end up fusing to sulfur 34, which is just an intermediary, and that immediately splits to the observed carbon 12 and neon 22, as observed experimentally, empirically observed. predicted by the theory and then observed in experimentation. Predicted by the theory and then observed in experimentation. Why? Because oxygen-17 over all the isotopes of oxygen, once synthesized from oxygen-16 and the proton in this magnetic core, is preferentially taken around or kept in that core. But what am I talking about here? I'm talking about intense magnetic strengths get produced in this topological magnetic monopole here. This topological magnetic monopole here. Not on a pulsed state, but on a resonant state here. And into that core, you get protons. The proton, other than tritium, is, I think what did I work it out? It's almost the same. Basically, protium or proton or atomic hydrogen are almost the same as tritium. And they are the best thing that you could spin align, nuclear magnetic spin align. And the best thing that you can possibly use to nuclear magnetic spin align them is a magnetohydrodynamic fractal structure that has these topological phase singularities, because that has the most intense magnetic field strength you can get in a stable system. And one builds on the other. And it can feed from the open environment. So I think that's all I need to show. And like I say, I will share this in more, when we've got the better version of it. Okay. But I want to share some points here from the overall sacred geometry structure that I've derived. The first off is that because of the way the wheels within the wheel arrange themselves, they arrange themselves on the golden ratio line here. And that allows for an asymmetric rotating magnetic field configuration. An asymmetric rotating magnetic field arrangement. This is the same kind of thing that Eugene Podkletnov in superconducting wires for a little time until they get too hot and the thing melts down. It's very expensive to make and very expensive to difficult to build. He's creating rotating magnetic fields that are superconducting and that is able to levitate. I'm saying that there is a magnetic flux loop that travels around here, but also there's a magnetic flux loop that travels around here and inside here, as we'll delve in. Okay, we have a phase singularity here. 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 We just need to look at this. This is a bubble structure by Metin R. in University of Göttingen in Germany. And when you have a two-order structure, which seems to be the way the top level always manifests itself in water, you have a phase singularity here and a phase singularity here. This is a vortex and this is an anti-vortex. And not only does it pull in material from the environment, it also causes some of the material that's pulled in to go into a closed loop. That's to say that this is an accretive process. It's an accretive process. And so the topological monopole structure that's built is allows the structure to build and build on each fractal substructure level. Okay, so we have a virial solution here. Now it's being fed sound. And why is that to say? I said sound a long time ago in resonance, in standing waves, produces a gravity and anti-gravity wave. Well, looking at the Stevenson paper here, this is actually part of a presentation that he gave, and it's here. And in this presentation, you can see the two images that we saw earlier, and we can see these gravity waves, and they've got these rectifiers for rectifying the gravitational waves and how you create your warp bubbles and stuff. But when we come down to the bottom, you've got your light cones here and stuff, all these kind of usual things that they talk about. But down the bottom here, he's got these backup slides. You don't get this in this presentation, but you get this in the backup slides. And you've got here the Christodoulou memory effect. The Christodoulou predicts persistent changes in the relative. Not interested in that to this moment. Not this, not this, not this. I'm interested in this. Mechanical generator concept. Array of synced mini PZTs. The hypothesis a PZT array can be used to create mechanical displacements in a quadrupole pattern to create gravitational waves. This is a PZT, and we've got standing waves in here. Now they're saying that it's creating a quadrupole of oscillation, but if I know from my brother's work in his resonance engine that you can create all kinds of standing wave on a PZT just with an ordinary standard PZT. We actually had some that were produced by NASA, and they were scored PZT, so they actually had an array of PZTs on the PZT, right? So I don't know whether it was this thing, but what I'm saying is you get the standing waves on there, and they are literally saying that this is producing a standing wave, and that is producing a quadrupole gravitational wave coming out. Okay, and you can almost see how this would produce your yin-yang structure. You can almost see it here. Anyway, going back to this, what I'm arguing here is that in the core of these structures, in the small box and the smaller boxes and the small boxes, where we have this cone vortex self-organizing the electrons coming in to the magnetic core, the phase singularity, the magnetic core. And if we blow this up, we can see that here, again, it's the same fractal structure. And here it's the same structure. And here it's the same structure. And here it's the same structure, all the way down. But only when we have a minimum of 3 do we end up with the ability to produce a stable core, because the virial solution of this structure and this structure supports the virial solution of this structure, and the virial solution of this structure and this structure produces the virial solution of the overall thing. And why do I say that this will produce an anti-gravity effect? Just think about what you saw earlier. You had one rotating thing on the end of an arm, and it's moving around like that. This is kind of the same logic in the POEMS theory that was verified by NASA. But then they moved down a more electromagnetic spin-oriented system for it to work. What you've got in this system, if you've got a spinning thing on this side and an anti-spinning thing on the other side. So one's trying to push this one down and this one's trying to push this one down, which means both of them are going to go in a direction. The overall vector is going to push it in a direction because it's asymmetric. Okay? I don't know whether that makes sense to you. It makes sense to me. And that's what I'm saying. And the point is that it doesn't dissipate. These things are able to energize themselves, and they energize themselves because they have a magnetic core. They have a magnetic core, as Roth was saying here. They are only able to operate based on this empirical data of study of ball lightning. It must be storing magnetic energy. And we showed that it is indeed storing magnetic energy in these papers by Wisniewski, sorry, not by Wisniewski, by Zverblis and by Nevesky, and separately, much later, by Freiberger. Okay? Blah, blah, blah. Is that all I wanted to say? And we know it does the job. We know it does the job because, you know, we have our wheels within wheels within wheels. This is our disruption zone. This is the high torsion interaction of the fractal level up. This overall structure produced 2 wheels, and this wheel here spat out 2 wheels. So this was the wheel that was in this wheel, and this wheel was in this wheel. Okay, so we showed this many times. And so, yeah, these systems where you have 2, they're able to pull material from the outer environment pull material from the outer environment to keep the structure going, pull material from the outer environment, and you can literally see the physical manifestation of the vortex into the topological monopole, into the magnetic core. So, what I've shown you today is someone that worked with the now deceased head of research at NASA. He's saying, that's J.R. Roth, he's saying that ball lightning is the key and that it has to be held together, that is to say, made stable, made a virial solution by stored magnetic energy. From the Wisniewski paper, which is cited by the ball lightning long-lived luminous plasmoids by Bogdanovich et al., they're saying Wisniewski or something like that would explain the topological monopole-like structures that they observe. Wisniewski is arguing that all superconductivity, whether it's Podgletnov superconductivity, whether it's tokamak superconductivity, whether it's anyone's superconductivity, it all relies on the formation of the topological monopole. It all relies on this Dirac monopole. Now, people say, monopole's not a real physical thing like an electron is. Well, I argue that an electron is made up of vast numbers of relic neutrinos, which are themselves waves in the ether, right? Waves, like waves in the everything, like they're clusters of relic neutrinos, which are the basic LC dipoles, okay, which are an anapole structure. So the electron isn't a fundamental thing. It isn't a fundamental thing. It's already a cluster of something else. So to complain that the Dirac monopole is also not a fundamental thing doesn't matter. It's just as not fundamental as a proton. A proton is not a fundamental thing. It's made up of quarks, at least, and gluons, right? You get it? So I'm saying it is a structure that forms, one, charge separation. Then you need fractal multi-axis hydrodynamic shear. This leads to a structure that starts to form the topological monopole, which then starts to reinforce the structure. These energy solitons then can aggregate into fractal structures. When they get to the point of being a wheel within a wheel within a wheel, or a wheel within a wheel within a wheel within a wheel, then they become stable in that as they're energized with more multi-axis hydrodynamic shear, which can be injected by off-axis electric discharges, as was being done by Ronald Richter down in Hummel Island in 1948, where in 1949 he saw ball lightning event. Actually, it wasn't there. I think it was when he was still in Iberia. But anyway, he saw in 1949 a ball lightning event, which he recounted to Scientific American in 1963. And he said that this could be the basis for fusion. And that's because he was doing it. He was trying to do work to make fusion, and he created it in 1949. This leads to virial solution of the basic magnetohydrodynamic structure, and they then join together to make a fractal magnetohydrodynamic structure, which leads to stored magnetic energy. And that stored magnetic energy thing keeps that thing operational until it dies back a bit. It opens up its window because the non-radiating boundary collapses a bit as the energy is used, and it pulls in more material. It separates that water, let's say that's the fuel, into the protons and the oxygen, the atomic hydrogen and the oxygen, and they go in and fuel it. And it can synthesize what we observe, typically iron, calcium, and silicon. And iron, calcium, and silicon, and oxygen, they're basically most of the mass of the Earth. Okay? So, this, for me, if we can get from a very, very small amount of spin-aligned bismuth in a desktop unit, a 0.14% reduction in the mass, with a field strength of only 0.2 of 1 Tesla. 0.2 of 1 Tesla. And calculations show that potentially you can get unimaginable amounts of Teslas in that core, where we know for a fact from Matsumoto's work, from Ken Shoulder's work, from everyone's work, that in that core of those structures you get these massive amounts of electrons in a condensed state, it would appear, and protons if you got them in supply. That will produce very vast numbers, in my view, of nuclear spin aligned protons. And they will form this gravitational nonlinear material that Robert L. Forward said would be necessary to produce measurable effects in anti-gravity. And it is naturally an asymmetric structure. I offer to you, friends, that this will allow us to defy gravity. And with that, I will ask you if you have any questions. Bob, where can I find Shishkin biology paper you mentioned the other day? I don't know quite which one it was, but if you go... do you mean the one that I mentioned where he did an experiment and within 2 days the treated water was good for biology and 1 month later it wasn't? Is that the one? I don't know. But if you look at Shishkin and search for Shishkin on Remote View, I've translated several of his papers. Okay, I haven't translated that one, but I will put it out. Yeah. Okay, so civilian space agency who has a lot to say for himself. You say things about mediated by blah, 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 blah. I'm referring to real research by real people, some of which passed on, that actually showed a measured effect that is on NASA's website, which they are admitting to. And they show the parameter space, and they show what is necessary to increase the anti-gravity effect. And Alzaphon is about aligning the spin of aluminium. They say in this paper that aluminium would be suitable. I would argue it is a suitable material. In fact, I said in my presentation in Cosmic Summit that aluminium is the fuel, one of the components of fuel you would want in the center of the fractal magnetohydrodynamic structure. Why? I said precisely because it seems to be such a good fuel in LENR. 1, we have it in the cavitation ultra experiments. 2, it is in the electrodes of the functional over unity unit, based on my suggestion of Dr. George Eagley. It is, in my view, nearly probably a cause of a large proportion of the energy yield from Castle Bravo. It was nearly half of the mass of the entire bomb, and that's with a bomb that contains a lot of uranium in it. So that go figure. And that's based on the Avi Loeb magnetic sled recovery of iron crenellated spheres that contained within them bits of natural uranium. Of course, Castle Bravo used natural uranium. Okay, so, and other elements that are typically in nuclear bombs of that type, it would appear, were in those particular iron-rich crenellated spheres. Where's the iron coming from? Well, you fuse 2 aluminiums together and you get iron. That's what we observe. Okay, so I'm basing on experiment. You know, I'm basing on what the full history of gravity research, from Heaviside to Lenz and Thüring to Gabriel Cron to the work of John Hutchison to Ken Shoulders, and all the way through to what I've showed you recently with what I just showed you with Shipov today, which he shared this week. It's all about including these angular momentum terms. So Design Lab 270 says, Bob, have you noticed the wheel within a wheel within a wheel vortex swirling down the center of the first tower, the dustification? I know there was some vortex involved there, caught on camera, yeah. Could you build a functional power plant right now with the information you have? I think so. I've kind of moved on from wanting to make a power system to a propulsion system, because a propulsion system gives you a power system anyway. So like, why build a propulsion system a power system to make a propulsion system when the propulsion system gives you the power system for free? I don't know. I may see on Tuesday a functional power system. We already have a heat producing system that I'm working with Bingjun Huang. That produces practical amounts of heat cavitation. I hope to be able to go to Kazakhstan and see the 70 kilowatt input energy cavitator that they're testing right there. Well, Stephen says he was using sound speakers to direct fusion. Yeah, that might be the case. He also said he was using it for detection of parameters going on. So Esoteric Gold says, do you think ball lightning has a component where it forces itself from Earth's ley lines or low level? I think that the ground chemistry and piezoelectric properties of the ground, in combination with thermal variations and in otherwise broader scale electromagnetic phenomena, lead to certain areas having higher production of ball lightning. For instance, in areas where there is a lot of, say, uranium or thorium in the ground, that will produce a lot of charged particles. Those charged particles will lead to production of charge clusters. The charge clusters will lead to a higher incidence of ball lightning phenomena. Yeah, well, the Attack Titan says, because you could use the revenue from the power plant to build further research, upscale your operation. I know, it all sounds so easy. It all sounds so easy. One, the project was never ever meant to set up to actually build any functional devices. It was sent up to find out what was going on. Once we replicate the effect, which we did on our second attempt, find out what was going on, which took a lot more work. Once we found out what was going on, try and educate on it, and then try and help people who are implementing various aspects of the technology to reach a successful outcome. That is kind of what we're between aim 2 and aim 3. By not trying to compete with people making devices, but rather assisting all of those making devices as an independent third party, we're able to visit people and honestly evaluate to the best of our ability what could or could not be going on with their systems and whether it's actually going on, but also to allow them to understand the risks and potential means to mitigate against risks as the technology becomes more accepted. Okay, so it's not about my precious and becoming fantastically wealthy. It's about enabling people like Bingjun Huang to deliver his technology and enabling Dr. George Eagley to get his ideas into a way that they start to move the needle to help whoever it is to better deliver on their promise. Could crowdfunding or similar things be a viable path for the common man? I think this is, Robert Forward is saying only big governments with vast amounts of money and lots of men and lots of time can deliver this, right? That's in terms of anti-gravity. I'm not so sure that actually needs that. I think it's going to be simpler than that. And I think we're quite close to understanding how we can achieve it simply. the evolabs.io is set up as an organization that is supported by and inspired by what the project has done in the last 13 and so years, but it's designed to receive funding independently and through the community allocate resources to proven open researchers to help things move forward. And let's see where things go. I think it's a very, very exciting time to be doing this. I think all the ducks are lining up right now. You know, mentally in my head, it's very, very clear what's going on. Hopefully, with what I've shared with you today, along with actual people that have been doing this for most of their lives, sharing right up to this Wednesday's their experience, in combination with historical papers, which we've been able to translate, you can understand in your head how you manipulate matter to get into a state where it organizes itself in a way that mitigates this seemingly unsurmountable force of gravity, which is actually extremely weak. Well, are you poor? I mean, I don't know. Like, the Attack Titan says he's poor. I mean, we're living in this fantastic time where generally most places have good sanitation if you're fortunate enough to live in the West. Most people can get a reasonable basis of food. We have good control of environment. Like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs are generally able to be taken care of in certain areas of the world relatively easily. You know, friends don't need to be expensive. Family, you can choose your family, not your siblings, but you can choose the wife you're with, hopefully. And you know, there's many ways to be rich other than money. But if we can deliver this, all economic prosperity the world over for hundreds of years has been reliant on increasing use of affordable energy. And this totally changes the game. It totally and utterly changes the game. And I honestly believe that we will be able to deliver this, and it won't be that complicated when it's done. It's just sometimes the devil is in the detail, and it's very complicated on the journey. Looking back, it looks simple because you miss it, all of the hard dead ends that were taken to get to the end point. But the end point is not in the public domain, because if it was in the public domain, everyone and their dog would have used an AI engine to tell them how to precisely build a device that works, complete with schematics. Okay, and since that hasn't happened, the knowledge is not in the public domain because it would have been scraped by those AI engines. Okay, so are we at the forefront? Maybe, possibly. And I think it's because there is this ignorance about the role of angular momentum, the ignorance of acceleration and seeking going on in rotating bodies, and ignorance of the role of nuclear spin as a means by which you can maximize the mass flow gravitational system. Now, when you look at, and just to clarify what we're talking about here, what is said by Forward here in his paper and his essay in 19 63, is that you get an electric field, okay, by moving electrons around a toroidal solenoid. And if you move mass in pipes around a toroidal solenoid, you get a gravitational dipole. Okay? And I argue that we have shown that the lifting here is a gravitational effect, that the material moving through here is a gravitational flux line, okay? And that it's pulling matter in from the environment and it's increasing intensity around this loop. Okay, and it pulls it in from here, but in a two-order structure, it pulls it in from here and here. And so what you're looking at here in forward suggestion is a mass flow going around in a spiral. Okay, and what I'm saying is actually happening here is there is a spiral. You can literally see the spiral here. You can literally see the spiral here. It's spiraling around here. We know it's producing a spiral that goes around here in this loop. Okay, and so this is mass flow. Now, if you imagine this is coherent matter, and so when we look at the overall structure, that where should we go here? Let's have a look. When the matter's coming round in this loop and going round in here, it comes out in a helical beam and it's going through there. This is coherent matter, and because it's coherent matter, it can get denser and denser and denser. And you can imagine it going at relativistic speeds. And so you have a combination of the things you need. You have matter going around in a helical spiral at relativistic speeds. Matter going around in a relativistic speed helical spiral. It is effectively a gravity wave. And in the core, you have protons, nuclear spin aligned, and that allows for the nonlinear focusing of the gravitational vector through the center. And this aligns with what Forward is saying. And if you look at what is being done here, they're adding a dielectric in the material to improve the moment. Okay. Yeah, I mean, the charge separation, when you have a dielectric material, water is dielectric material. It's also polar. When I looked at running the maths on certain things that Forward suggested, even with ball lightning spinning at a third of the speed of light, I gave a certain size ball, and I had a mass in there, of iron. I think it took 4 hours to drift from the inside of the sphere to the center of the sphere where it would get stuck. So you're not going to really do this with physical matter. And I think Podkletnov was good to realize that. So just to be clear, I have said that relic neutrinos, because and clusters thereof in the form of energy solitons, they have a toroidal moment or an anapole moment, toroidal moment for the clusters thereof, and an anapole moment for the elementary LC dipoles, relic neutrinos. And they are able, because relic neutrinos are gravitationally lensed, and according to Bob McElrath, and I agree with him, they are a standard model compliant model of gravity, and therefore they interact with the gravity waves that are produced and the vectors that are produced in this system, and they are part of why these anomalies were observed by Werner von Braun and the anomalies observed on the neodymium or the rare earth magnets by the NASA team. In my view, it's consistent. You don't have to change any aspect of the theory for it to be consistent with their unexplained observations, empirically observed observations. Okay. So I think probably I'm going to sign off today, because I have another interview at 1 o'clock tomorrow, and I have some root canal surgery to occur in about 7 hours time. So I have root canal surgery, then an interview, and then my kids are doing a concert. So that's what I have for you today. I think we are very close to having the ability to understand how to control gravity. And unlike Robert Forward, in his 1962 paper here, he says down here in his written version here, none of this work will be easy. We are not going to have anti-gravity in every home. But we don't have a Saturn rocket in every garage either. Future progress in the control of gravitation, like all modern sciences, will require special projects involving large sums of men, money, and energy. You will not have it because some animals are more equal than others. As our friend Napoleon might say here. This was Ode, Defying Gravity. Defying Gravity. So you need to define it to defy it. My name is Bob Greenyer. Buenas noches, dobranoc, good night.